What transgression, what grievous breach of duty could a teacher possibly commit that would shatter the fragile trust of students? It was during the cacophony of music class, amidst the playful strumming and nascent melodies, that I first felt it an insidious, almost spectral tingling, a familiar precursor, like a silent alarm blaring within my very core. 3 months of hard-won reprieve, 3 months of a deceptive calm, now threatened to dissolve into the terrifying storm I knew was imminent. Miss Blackwood, I managed to articulate, my voice a tight whisper, a desperate plea already laced with a palpable hum of an impending neurological cascade. I desperately need to get to the nurse. I'm about to have a seizure. Her response was immediate, dismissive, and utterly chilling. A slow, theatrical roll of her eyes, a gesture dripping with cynical amusement. "Oh, please," she drawled, her tone dripping with saccharine condescension. "It seems every child nowadays is suddenly afflicted with epilepsy. Quite the fashionable ailment, wouldn't you agree?" Her words felt like a physical blow, invalidating my terror. "No, you don't understand," I pleaded, my voice growing weaker, the insidious prickling sensation now a relentless march up my arm, a ticking clock counting down to oblivion. I knew, with chilling certainty, I had mere moments, perhaps 2 precious minutes, before consciousness would desert me entirely. "I have a comprehensive seizure action plan. Right there in my file," I urged, clutching at any straw of hope. "Sit down," she commanded, her voice a steel trap. She lumbered towards my desk, not with an ounce of compassion or a flicker of concern, but with a predatory slowness. Leaning over me, her breath a warm, unwelcome cloud, she confided with a conspiratorial smirk. "You know, my sister faced a similar dilemma when her own daughter claimed to have seizures. She chose a radical approach, complete and utter disregard. And within a week, lo and behold, a miraculous cure." At that terrifying pronouncement, Emily, a fierce defender and keen observer, sprang to her feet, her gaze fixed on the emergency button by the door, a beacon of hope in the suffocating classroom. "She's not faking," Emily cried out, her voice a desperate clarion. I'd witnessed her seizures before, but the substitute teacher, a formidable human barrier, effortlessly intercepted her. "The only thing seizing here," Miss Blackwood sneered, her eyes glinting with malicious triumph, "is her insatiable hunger for attention." Then, with a deliberate, chilling slowness that has forever etched itself into the annals of my memory, she sealed our fate. She ambled towards the classroom door, not to open it, but to secure it. The metallic thunk of the deadbolt sliding into place resonated with an ominous finality, a prison door clanging shut. With a flourish, she pocketed the key, a tangible symbol of our captivity. "Nobody," she announced, her voice resonating with perverse authority, "leaves this room until she confesses her charade. This insidious victim complex is utterly destroying your generation." The air crackled with a dangerous tension, a collective gasp followed by a burgeoning defiance. "Call 911, a voice pierced the silence, a desperate student already fumbling for their phone, a small beacon of hope against the encroaching darkness. "Phone's in the box, now," Miss Blackwood barked, her eyes scanning the room like a hawk. With a swift, almost violent motion, she seized a collection box, an ominous receptacle for our technological lifelines. "Or you will all face suspension." Simultaneously, the edges of my vision began to fray, blurring into an indistinct haze, a visual manifestation of the encroaching neurological chaos. 2 minutes. That was my neurologist's stern directive, the critical window I had before my brain would completely short-circuit, before the delicate symphony of my consciousness would devolve into a catastrophic cacophony. And just when I thought the situation couldn't possibly worsen, when I desperately needed an ally, my loathed cousin Walsh, a venomous serpent disguised as family, chose that precise moment to strike. "She's always been a faker," he sneered, his voice laced with years of petty resentment, "ever since she was a little kid, playing these dramatic games for attention." Miss Blackwood's face, previously a mask of icy disdain, lit up with a truly terrifying glee. "See," she crowed, a triumphant glint in her eyes. "Even her own kin confirms she's merely putting on a performance." As if to mock our escalating terror, she sauntered back to the smartboard, her movements betraying a twisted sense of purpose. With a flick of her wrist, she conjured YouTube onto the massive screen. "You know what really helps with these fake seizures?" she purred, a chillingly saccharine tone coating her malicious intent. She typed with deliberate slowness, flashing strobe light 10 hours, and then, with a triumphant smirk, hit play. "Exposure therapy," she announced, her voice brimming with a chilling rationality. "If you were genuinely epileptic, I would never dream of inflicting this upon you. But since you're merely orchestrating a performance, the screen, a window to our learning, instantly transformed into a weapon." It exploded with a relentless, blinding onslaught of rapid-fire white and black flashes, a relentless visual assault that felt like a direct invasion of my very being. My brain, already a tempest of neurological activity, felt as though it were being electrocuted, each flash a searing jolt. "Turn it off," Emily shrieked, her voice a raw, desperate plea, her hands flying to shield her eyes. Photosensitive epilepsy is real, but the sub, a living embodiment of cruelty, only cranked the brightness to maximum, amplifying the sensory torture. "Psychosomatic reaction," she dismissed, waving a hand dismissively. She believes she's seizing, so her body obligingly mimics it. In that harrowing moment, as the classroom pulsed with the violent flashes, David, a quiet classmate, suddenly clutched his head, a guttural groan escaping his lips. His entire body, caught in the infernal rhythm of the strobe, went rigid, locked in an agonizing spasm. "I can't." "The lights," he gasped, his words choked by the encroaching horror. It was then that the fragile dam of composure collectively broke. The room erupted into sheer pandemonium. Kids instinctively dove under desks, seeking refuge from the relentless assault, throwing jackets over their heads in a desperate, futile attempt to block the searing light. Turn it off! Turn it off! The chorus of desperate pleas swelled. Malik, with a selfless urgency, struggled to cover my eyes with his trembling hands, whispering frantic prayers. Please don't seize. Please don't seize. Ryan, driven by a primal need for escape, flung himself at the locked door, repeatedly slamming his shoulder into it. A desperate battering ram. Help! Somebody help! The sub merely watched, a cold, detached amusement dancing in her eyes, then erupted into a chilling, mirthless laugh. Sit down, she commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. Or you're expelled. Already, 3 other students had succumbed, collapsing to the floor, their bodies racked by the relentless throbbing. The malicious light was no longer just triggering my impending seizure. It was a potent catalyst, igniting a spectrum of suffering in everyone. Migraines, a blinding agony behind the eyes. Profound nausea, the stomach churning violently. Pure, unadulterated panic, clawing at their throats. Make it stop, Jenna wailed, her hands pressed tightly against her temples, a futile attempt to crush the pain. Through the small, wire-mesh window in the door, a flicker of hope appeared. Mr. Peter, the teacher from the adjacent classroom, peered in, his brow furrowed with concern. But Miss Blackwood, ever vigilant in her tyranny, swiftly stepped in front of the window, deliberately obstructing his view of the unfolding horror. She offered him a saccharine, deceitful thumbs up, a performance for an unwitting audience, before casually yanking down the window shade, plunging us back into our private hell. He, unsuspecting, simply walked away, leaving us to our torment. This is torture, Emily screamed, her voice hoarse with desperation. 1 minute left. I could feel my consciousness, a flickering candle in a hurricane, rapidly slipping away. My muscles, already on the brink, began to twitch involuntarily, a precursor to the violent storm. And then, with a malevolent smirk, the sub actually increased the speed of the strobe, amplifying the relentless torment. When I was in school, nobody had seizures, she pontificated, her voice dripping with disdain. Now, suddenly, everyone's neurodivergent. Thanks, social media, my body was no longer my own. It was a vessel, commandeered by an internal insurgency. The seizure hit me then, not as a ripple, but as a blinding, obliterating lightning bolt. Sarah, my steadfast friend, recounted the harrowing details later, her voice still trembling with the trauma of it all. It was then, she explained, that the situation spiraled irrevocably into true horror. My seizure, a brutal, relentless force, seized control of my body, transforming me into a frenzied, thrashing puppet. I was foaming at the mouth, my limbs flailing uncontrollably, and worst of all, my lips were beginning to tinge with an alarming, bluish hue, a terrifying herald of oxygen deprivation. Sarah, her composure shattered, desperately attempted to roll me onto my side, a crucial first aid measure, but my body was convulsing with such violent intensity that her efforts were futile. She's dying, Sarah shrieked, her voice a guttural scream of pure terror, my own blood, crimson and stark, staining her hands from where I had bitten my tongue in the throes of the seizure. And Miss Blackwood, she stood there, an impervious statue of cruelty, serenely munching on an apple, completely detached from the unfolding tragedy. Oscar-worthy performance, she commented, her tone a detached critique, though I must admit, the fake blood is a tad dramatic. It was at this unbearable juncture, this ultimate display of callous indifference, that Billy, the quiet, unassuming kid who had never once caused a speck of trouble, finally snapped. A transformation, stark and terrifying, swept over him. He lunged, seizing a heavy music stand and wielding it like a formidable battering ram, an instrument of destruction. Violence, the sub scoffed, utterly unconcerned by the escalating danger, her focus disturbingly misplaced. She calmly pulled out her phone, her thumb poised over the record button. Oh, this is going straight to the principal, rest assured. With a primal roar, Billy swung the music stand, not at a person, but at the smartboard, the very source of our torture. Crack, the screen, which had so recently spewed its tormenting flashes, went instantly, blessedly, utterly black. Destruction of property, she shrieked, her voice piercing, finally showing a flicker of genuine alarm, but not for human lives. That's a felony, but Billy, driven by an unbridled, righteous fury, was unstoppable. He whirled around, redirecting his fury to the locked door, smashing the window with another deafening blow. Shards of glass exploded upwards, glittering dangerously across the floor like deadly confetti. The classroom had descended into an abyss of utter chaos. David, just 3 feet away, was now in the full throes of his own harrowing seizure, his body rigid, convulsing. Jenna, overwhelmed by the prolonged strobe exposure, was wrenching violently, her body purged by the sheer intensity of the sensory assault. Assault, Miss Blackwood bellowed, clutching her recording phone like a talisman. You're all going to jail. It was through that newly shattered window, amidst the glittering debris and the screams of terror, that my boyfriend Darren, a whirlwind of furious concern, finally caught sight of me. His eyes, wide with disbelief and horror, instantly locked onto my convulsing form. He lost it. He plunged his arm through the jagged opening, heedless of the consequence, slicing his hand on the treacherous glass as he frantically fumbled for the deadbolt, desperate to breach the barrier that held me captive. Don't you dare, the sub shrieked, her voice a desperate, animalistic cry, as Darren struggled with the lock, his blooded hand a testament to his determination. But Emily and Billy, a united front of youthful indignation, seized her, holding her back with surprising strength, momentarily neutralizing her malevolent presence. With a final, desperate click, the deadbolt yielded. The door flew open, bursting inward, and a torrent of teachers, their faces etched with shock and alarm, flooded into the room. Their expressions morphing from confusion to horror as they bore witness to the absolute devastation. Call 911, a voice, sharp with urgency, sliced through the pandemonium. Multiple students seizing, even as they physically restrained her, hauling her away from the epicenter of her self-made disaster. The sub continued to scream, her voice hoarse with deranged conviction. They're all faking. This is nothing but mass hysteria. The paramedics, a whirlwind of efficiency and grave urgency, arrived with chilling news. I had been clinically dead for a terrifying 90 seconds. They had to perform an emergency intubation right there, amidst the lingering chaos of the hallway. A stark battle for my life unfolding just feet away from where other paramedics desperately worked on David, whose body still writhed with undiagnosed epilepsy. Miss Blackwood, after inflicting such unspeakable trauma, was simply granted paid time off, her performance merely under review. It was an insult that stung deeper than any physical wound. In the immediate aftermath, a few compassionate parents rallied, organizing a GoFund, a digital beacon of hope, to help cover the exorbitant treatment costs. But the stark reality of healthcare costs in America often eclipses even the most generous intentions. Fast forward a mere 2 weeks later, and we were back in the sterile, fluorescent-lit confines of science class. The teacher, her face somber, delivered the news, a quiet pronouncement that echoed like a death knell in the silence. David's parents, despite their desperate efforts, had only managed to raise $30,000 of the staggering $130,000 required for his life-saving treatment. He didn't make it. In that moment, a profound, chilling certainty solidified within me. A quiet fury, cold and resolute, began to simmer. We couldn't trust the system. We had to take matters into our own shaking hands. We had to destroy Miss Blackwood. My own hands, still traumatized by the recent ordeal, trembled so violently that I found myself utterly incapable of holding my pencil, the graphite dancing mockingly on the paper. The science teacher, oblivious, droned on about the intricate miracle of cell division, but all I could visualize, all I could feel, was the unbearable irony David's cells had tragically ceased their essential division, his young life extinguished, simply because his parents couldn't afford the exorbitant cost of keeping them going. I sat there, utterly frozen, a silent witness to a world that seemed to move on with shocking indifference. Everyone else was meticulously taking notes, as if nothing had happened, as if David hadn't died, as if Miss Blackwood wasn't comfortably ensconced at home, drawing a paycheck. Completely oblivious to the gaping void David's absence had left, a void that could never be filled, a life extinguished before it had truly begun. 6 feet in the ground. The sheer, suffocating intensity of the rage in my chest felt like a furnace, scorching me from the inside out, so hot and violent that I truly believed I might vomit right there at my desk, amidst the mundane clatter of pens and papers. The moment the bell shrieked, a piercing release from the oppressive classroom air, I bolted, a blur of desperate urgency, to the nearest bathroom, barely making it to the porcelain altar of the toilet before the world tilted and everything. Every last morsel of lunch and shred of composure came up in ragged, painful heaves. Emily, a silent, unwavering shadow of support, followed me in, her cool hand gently pulling my hair back from my face as I retched, offering a steadying presence. Between my dry heaves, her voice was a fierce, insistent whisper, a steel thread cutting through the lingering nausea. We simply cannot let Miss Blackwood get away with this. A part of me, the logical, furious part, knew with absolute certainty she was right, but my body felt like a puppet whose strings had been cut. I could barely hold myself upright, my legs were a quivering mess, trembling uncontrollably, and my head felt like a drum being pounded from the inside, each beat echoing the chaos within. That night, sleep was a cruel, elusive dream. I just lay there, a rigid, unmoving figure, staring wide-eyed at the textured ceiling, which seemed to mock me with its indifferent patterns. My mind, a relentless projector, replayed those agonizing, eternal 90 seconds when I had been, by all medical accounts, dead. The memory wasn't a fuzzy dream, it was a stark, chilling reality. The profound, absolute darkness, the terrifying embrace of nothingness. It wasn't just physical pain, but an existential vacuum. And in that terrifying void, a haunting question echoed. Did David experience that same crushing darkness? Or was his journey into the unknown somehow different, perhaps more peaceful, or even more terrifying than mine? My parents, their faces etched with a worrying that spoke volumes more than any words, maintained a vigilant, owly watch over me. Every 60 minutes, like clockwork, one of them would check in. Their greatest fear, a tangible presence in the room, the paralyzing dread that the immense stress of David's death might trigger another seizure, plunging me back into that terrifying abyss. Mom, ever the tender nurturer, would softly peek through the doorframe, her voice a hushed bomb, asking if I needed anything, a glass of water, a comforting touch. Dad, on the other hand, was a sentinel of quiet strength, often just standing silently in the doorway, his gaze fixed on my chest, meticulously watching the rise and fall of my breath, as if his sheer willpower could keep me safe, keep me alive. The next morning, the school, usually a vibrant tapestry of youthful exuberance, felt draped in a somber, muted silence. David's locker, once an ordinary metal box, had been transformed into an impromptu, poignant shrine. Flowers, a heartbreaking mosaic of color and fading life, and cards, their handwritten messages a testament to collective grief, were piling up, overflowing onto the floor. Someone had tenderly taped his school picture to the cold, unforgiving metal door, a smiling, innocent face that now felt like a ghost. People moved like shadows, pausing to leave solemn notes, each word a whispered eulogy, or placing soft, flesh-stuffed animals, symbols of lost childhood and innocence. A freshman girl, her backpack slung carelessly over one shoulder, strolled by utterly oblivious, and in a voice devoid of any real understanding, asked what happened when someone, their own voice heavy with sorrow, recounted the horrific details of the seizure in music class. She actually, unbelievably, scoffed. Sounds made up, she drawled, her words a slap across my already bruised heart. The raw, guttural urge to scream, to unleash the torrent of my grief and fury at her casual cruelty, surged through me, but I remained rooted to the spot, paralyzed. I just stood there, staring blankly at the burgeoning memorial of flowers, each petal a silent, aching testament to a life brutally cut short. At lunch, the time usually buzzing with adolescent energy, I found Billy, a solitary figure adrift in a sea of empty tables, hunched in the furthest corner of the cafeteria. His knuckles, still swollen and bruised, were encased in thick bandages, a stark, painful reminder of the moment his rage had manifested, punching a jagged hole through the smartboard. He looked up as I slid into the seat opposite him, his eyes, dark and haunted, meeting mine. The circles beneath them were deep purple valleys, telling an unspoken story of restless nights and waking nightmares. He hadn't been sleeping either. His voice was a raw, rasping whisper. I can't stop seeing David on the floor. The words hung heavy in the air, a shared burden of trauma. We simply sat there engulfed in a suffocating silence, because what could possibly be said? What words could mend a broken heart, or erase the indelible image of a friend dying? Nothing. Absolutely nothing would bring David back. After school, Darren, his face a grim mask of determination, was waiting by my locker. In his hand was a thick stack of printed papers, crisp and cold against his skin, a tangible product of relentless digital sleuthing. He'd managed to unearth Miss Blackwood's social media accounts, a digital trail of vitriol and prejudice, just before she had, perhaps belatedly, scrambled to make them private. Page after page, scrolling back years, revealed a horrifying pattern. Post after post where she mercilessly mocked kids with disabilities. Her language was chillingly dismissive, casually labeling their struggles as merely trendy, a passing fad. She even went so far as to praise her sister's tough love approach to her own daughter's fake seizures, a phrase that sent a fresh wave of nausea churning in my gut. And then, there were the pictures. Smiling photos of her at some slick conference, the banner behind her boldly proclaiming its mission to combat victim mentality in schools, each successive post. Each venomous word, each hypocritical image, made my stomach clench and churn, rekindling the furious urge to throw up again. A visceral response to such profound, calculated cruelty. David's funeral, a somber, wrenching affair, arrived just 3 days later, feeling both impossibly fast and endlessly delayed. The church was packed, overflowing with mourners, a testament to the life he had touched. In the front row, David's mother, Nev, sat utterly bereft, a fragile, hollowed-out figure who looked as though she hadn't touched food or known a moment of sleep since the unthinkable had happened. Her eyes were sunken, her skin pale, a living portrait of inconsolable grief. When I finally gathered the courage to approach and offer my respects, to simply be there for her, she reached out, her hand shooting out to grasp mine with a desperate, bone-crushing intensity that sent a jolt of pain up my arm. Her grip was so tight it actually hurt, yet I didn't pull away. She leaned in, her voice a ragged, broken whisper, a torrent of grief and disbelief, recounting the endless GoFund messages. The hollow echoes of I'm so sorry, but sorry was a meaningless sound, an empty gesture. $30,000, she choked out, isn't enough. It's not enough to bring him back. Her fingers were crushing mine, squeezing with an almost violent force. But I held firm, recognizing the desperate, primal need behind her grip. She wasn't just holding my hand. She was clinging to a lifeline, to anyone, anything that could offer an anchor in her shattered world. She needed someone, anyone, to hold on to. After the solemn, suffocating service, as people milled around the parking lot, I spotted Walsh by his car, a familiar figure yet suddenly a stranger. A white-hot surge of indignation, a powerful, uncontrollable current, propelled me forward. I couldn't help myself. I walked straight up to him, my voice trembling but firm with an accusation that had been festering in my mind. How, I demanded, the word sharp and cutting. How could you do it? How could you tell that substitute I was faking, when you knew about my epilepsy? The question hung in the air, heavy with betrayal. Right there, beside his car, in the glare of the parking lot, he crumpled. Tears welled in his eyes, tracking paths down his pale face, and he began to sob, his shoulders shaking. Our grandmother, he stammered, his voice thick with guilt. She always told me you were faking for attention, and I believed her. It was easier, you know, easier than accepting you were really sick. He said he was sorry, his voice a choked whisper of regret, but the word, a meager offering, felt utterly hollow. Sorry, I thought, the bitter truth echoing in my mind, didn't bring David back. Monday morning, the sterile, intimidating formality of Principal Penn's office awaited me and my parents. She sat enthroned behind her massive, polished desk, a barrier of authority between us. Her condolences were meticulously crafted, carefully weighed, devoid of genuine warmth, each syllable chosen with the precision of a diplomat. Her words were a carefully constructed edifice of bureaucracy, endlessly circling back to proper procedures, like a shield against any real accountability. She emphasized, with a chilling, almost robotic repetition, how the school had followed protocol, how substitute teachers undergo training, her voice a drone of officialese. Yet, not once, not a single time, did she dare to utter the truth that those very procedures, those meticulously followed protocols, had catastrophically failed David. And his name, when it was finally forced from her lips, was never spoken without a furtive, almost imperceptible glance towards her lawyer, a shadowy, unseen presence on her phone line, a legal phantom dictating her every cautious utterance. My parents, though their faces were strained, valiantly attempted to maintain a calm facade, but I could see the telltale clench of Dad's jaw, a silent, furious tightening every single time she articulated that bloodless word, procedures. Following that emotionally draining meeting, they promptly shuffled me off to another office, another sterile environment, to meet with Ren Wigley, the district's 504 coordinator. They sat there, a picture of professional concern, my entire life, my medical history, reduced to the impersonal pages of an open file spread before them. A mask of practice, fake sympathy was plastered across their faces as they meticulously reviewed my accommodation plan. Their questions, delivered with an almost performative earnestness, kept circling back to a single, infuriating query. Is there anything we could have done differently? It was as if David wasn't literally, undeniably dead because of their inaction, their protocols, their system. They wanted me to absolve them, to utter the soothing lie that everything was okay, that the system worked. But the truth, a brutal, undeniable truth, screamed in my heart. The system hadn't worked. The system had killed David, and they, with their fake smiles and bureaucratic platitudes, wanted me to pretend it hadn't. I sat there, a captive audience, as they droned on about updated training and new protocols, their words dissolving into a meaningless hum. All I could see, playing on a relentless loop in my mind's eye, was David, convulsing violently on that cold, unforgiving classroom floor. A chilling realization began to dawn on me, a deep, unsettling feeling about Miss Blackwood. It felt profoundly strange, almost deliberate. How precisely she seemed to know which buttons to push, how to amplify the danger to David, the strobe lights, deployed with such calculated timing. The locked door trapping him, cutting off any escape or aid. Even her casual, venomous dismissal of epilepsy as trendy, it wasn't just ignorance. It was a weaponized prejudice. It was as if she had this entire, malevolent plan, a horrifying choreography of neglect, ready to be executed for some twisted reason. The memory of it was visceral. The way his young body went rigid, suddenly and terrifyingly immobile. The way his eyes rolled back, revealing only the whites. A chilling glimpse into an inner void, the sickening image of the substitute teacher, Miss Blackwood, standing there, casually, calmly eating her apple while David lay dying, gasping his last breaths just feet away. And yet, amidst all this horror, the officials kept talking, their voices a continuous stream of corporate euphemisms, about moving forward and learning from this tragedy. But what exactly did they learn? They never said, they never once admitted they were wrong. They never, not even once, acknowledged the most fundamental truth. David should still be alive. When I finally walked out of that office, the sterile air feeling suddenly charged with a new resolve, a stark, undeniable truth crystallized in my mind. Nothing, absolutely nothing, would change unless we, the ones who cared, the ones who grieved, made it change. Miss Blackwood, I knew with a bitter certainty, would eventually return from her paid leave, and then, inevitably, some other kid, equally vulnerable, equally deserving of protection, would die. The school, in its endless bureaucratic cycle, would simply schedule more meetings, more discussions about procedures and protocols, but without real accountability. Nothing would actually get better. That's when the seed of an idea, a fierce, burning need for justice, took root. That's when Emily, and Billy, and Darren, and I, a small band of determined teenagers, started planning. We weren't going to let them sweep this monstrous injustice under the rug, to pretend David never existed, that his life hadn't mattered. The very first step, a declaration of our unwavering intent, was a trip to the police station downtown. My mom, her face a mask of worried support, drove us there in her unassuming minivan, the hum of the engine a counterpoint to our tense silence. Emily, ever the strategist, kept her phone clutched tight, her fingers flying across the screen, relentlessly checking for updates from the other parents, coordinating our growing network of allies. The police station itself was a place of dull, muted authority, permeated by the stale, strangely comforting sense of old coffee and industrial-strength floor cleaner. We endured the agonizing weight, perched on those hard, unforgiving plastic chairs for what felt like an eternity, but was in reality two agonizing hours, before the detective finally called us into his office. On his desk, stark and undeniable, was a thick folder, its tab prominently displaying David's name. I could clearly see the corner of David's death certificate, a stark, almost insolent, corner of paper peeking out from beneath a stack of documents on the detective's clipboard. It was a tangible, irrefutable confirmation of loss, yet the detective, his gaze unwavering but somehow detached, kept circling around it with legalistic jargon. He uttered phrases like alleged incident and under investigation with a practiced cadence, as if trying to cushion the blow of reality with bureaucratic formality. All while that stark piece of paper, screaming of finality, lay right there. It was infuriating, a deliberate obfuscation of what we all knew to be true. He then launched into a weary explanation, a well-rehearsed monologue about how these cases take time and how there's a process they have to follow, his words feeling hollow, almost dismissive. In the face of our raw grief, my mom, her voice thin with a mixture of desperation and exhaustion, dared to ask when we might hear something definitive, something concrete. He merely offered a non-committal shrug, a gesture that spoke volumes of his detachment, and responded with a vague, disheartening could be weeks or months. Weeks or months. Could he truly offer nothing more specific to a grieving family? The ambiguity hung heavy in the air, the cruel prolonging of our agonizing wait. Emily's mom, who had been bravely holding back tears, finally succumbed, a quiet sob escaping her lips. The detective, with a perfunctory, almost automatic motion, pushed a tissue box across the table towards her, muttering that he understood our frustration, but reiterated the importance of being thorough. Yet, the word alleged continued to punctuate his statements, a constant, irritating reminder that despite David being undeniably dead, despite every single one of us having witnessed the horrific event unfold, despite the paramedics' detailed reports already compiled, the district was conducting their own investigation, too. It felt like a deliberate tactic to muddy the waters, to cast doubt where there was none. Everything, he insisted, was under review. That was his impenetrable mantra, the ultimate bureaucratic wall, under review. He would offer nothing further, no glimmer of information. Just that infuriating, repetitive phrase. 3 days crawled by, each one feeling like an eternity. Then, my mom, perhaps in a misguided attempt to pull me back into the mundane rhythm of life, declared we needed to go to the mall for new shoes. The food court, an ironically cheerful facade for my internal turmoil, assaulted my senses first with its lighting. Those ancient fluorescent tubes hummed with a low, irritating buzz, casting a sickly yellow-white glow that constantly flickered, a stroboscopic assault on my already frayed nerves. I managed to push the discomfort down, to numb myself to the sensory overload, until we inadvertently passed the orange Julius stand. That's when the lights, already a source of unease, began to intensify their erratic dance, pulsing with a dizzying rhythm. A sudden, visceral tightening seized my chest, an invisible vice clamping down. My hands, without any conscious command, began to tremble uncontrollably, the tremor spreading rapidly through my entire body. The insistent flickering of those lights, now a malevolent presence, twisted my perception, and suddenly, horrifyingly, I was no longer in the bustling mall. I was back. Back in that classroom, trapped in the chilling, replayed loop of what had happened. The world around me dissolved, replaced by the vivid, terrifying replay. I dropped to the floor, right there by the enticing aroma of the pretzel stand, my legs giving out beneath me. The muffled sounds of the mall slowly filtered back in, but they were laced with the unnerving clarity of onlookers' reactions. People were staring, their faces a mixture of confusion and curiosity. A young kid, utterly devoid of empathy, had his phone out, recording my humiliating descent into panic. Security guards, alerted by the commotion, came rushing over, their faces etched with suspicion. They thought I was on drugs, or suffering some kind of public breakdown. My mom, her voice strained with desperation, kept trying to explain her words of frantic, ineffectual shield against their assumptions, but I couldn't form a coherent thought. Couldn't utter a single syllable. I simply couldn't breathe. The merciless fluorescent lights continued their flickering assault, relentless, accusatory. They ultimately had to escort me out, not through the main entrance, but through the employee exit, a corridor usually reserved for staff and deliveries. Every eye in the food court seemed to be trained on me, their whispers a collective, judging murmur. I felt utterly exposed, so incredibly weak, so profoundly broken. The experience left me hollowed out, a mere shell. The following Monday, a new kind of challenge presented itself at school. A girl from the student newspaper, her presence radiating an unsettling blend of ambition and morbid curiosity, approached me. She had her recorder conspicuously out, a silent, intrusive witness to our conversation. And everything about her posture screamed story. She wanted to do a story about what happened, she announced, her tone almost businesslike. A part of me, a deep, wounded part that yearned for justice and validation, desperately wanted to unburden myself, to tell her everything, every agonizing, infuriating detail about Miss Blackwood, to lay bare the truth of her negligence. But another, more cynical and cautious part of me, having witnessed the sensationalism and distortions of media, knew all too well how these things often unravel. One careless, poorly chosen word, one innocent turn of phrase, and suddenly, the narrative isn't about the injustice anymore. It's twisted into something entirely different, something less sympathetic. Or even worse, the school, ever vigilant in protecting its image, would find a way to discredit me, to portray me as a fabricator, to twist my words until I became the unreliable narrator. I simply told her I couldn't talk about it yet. She persisted, her voice laced with a conviction that felt both admirable and intrusive, arguing that people deserved to know the truth. Perhaps she was right. Intellectually, I knew she was, but emotionally, profoundly, I wasn't ready. The wound was too fresh, too raw to be exposed to the harsh glare of public scrutiny. That weekend, I retreated into the sanctuary of my room, channeling my turbulent emotions into a methodical act of organization. It was a desperate attempt to regain some semblance of control, to fight back against the chaos that threatened to consume me. I pulled out my meticulously documented seizure action plan, the very one the school was supposed to have rigorously followed, its pages now screaming of their neglect. I unearthed all my hospital records from the past 3 harrowing years, a testament to my ongoing struggle and the careful management of my condition. Then came the emails, those carefully worded messages my parents had sent at the beginning of the school year, explicitly explaining my medical needs and outlining the necessary precautions. Finally, the formal letter from my neurologist, a clear, authoritative declaration of my condition. Each crisp, official piece of paper I held felt inherently significant, transforming from a mere document into a vital piece of evidence, irrefutable proof that David's tragic death and my subsequent trauma could never have happened if protocols had been observed. I meticulously made copies of everything, ensuring a robust paper trail, then carefully arranged them in a binder, separating them with color-coded tabs for easy navigation. My mom, seeing my quiet determination, joined me, helping to scan every single page into digital format. We didn't stop there. We saved everything onto 3 different flash drives, a triple redundancy just-in-case measure against loss or deliberate sabotage. While I was immersed in this forensic archaeology of my medical history, a part of my mind remained fixated on David. I kept checking his GoFund page, a cruel digital barometer of fleeting public sympathy. It was still stuck at a disheartening $30,000. A pittance compared to the overwhelming $130,000 his parents desperately needed to cover all the exorbitant medical bills incurred before he ultimately passed. The initial outpouring of support had dwindled, the flow of heartfelt comments flowing to a trickle, then ceasing altogether. People, as I had cynically observed, had moved on to other crises, other tragedies. That's just how it worked, I thought with a bitter resignation. Something truly terrible happens, everyone expresses outrage, or sorrow for a week, perhaps 2. Then the world shifts its attention, and they simply forget. Kids die. I'm used with a profound, aching despair, because their families are trapped in a system that makes life-saving treatment an unaffordable luxury. That's just the brutal, undeniable reality of things. This festering anger, a hot, corrosive acid, was eating me up inside, manifesting as a constant, gnawing sickness in my stomach, a persistent unease that robbed me of any peace. On Sunday, my friends Emily and Billy, along with Malik, arrived, a welcome surge of solidarity. We congregated in the hushed, slightly echoing space of my basement, a makeshift war room, attempting to collaboratively figure out our next move. Darren, however, showed up conspicuously late, and rather than joining us in the circle of desperate strategizing, he chose to perch awkwardly on the bottom step of the stairs, a physical manifestation of his emotional distance. He kept checking his phone, his attention fragmented, clearly elsewhere. Finally, Emily, ever direct, couldn't hold back any longer. "What's your problem, Darren?" she challenged, her voice edged with a blend of frustration and hurt. He mumbled a response, his gaze still fixed on his screen, explaining that his coach had explicitly told him not to get involved, warning him that it could mess up his scholarship chances. The words landed with a sickening thud, hurting far more deeply than I had anticipated. He was supposed to be with us, a loyal ally. He was supposed to care, not just about David, but about me, about the glaring injustice. But his stupid football scholarship, a fleeting, self-serving ambition, was apparently more important than loyalty, than justice, than genuine human connection. It was Emily, ever the pragmatist, who then suggested a concrete course of action. We should file public records requests. Her older sister, she explained, had done it once for a school project. A seemingly mundane precedent for what felt like a monumental undertaking. We immediately plunged into the arduous task, spending hours meticulously drafting the requests, specifying every crucial piece of information we needed. The exact recordings of the 911 call. Any security camera footage from the hallways around the incident. The official incident reports filed by school staff. We sent them to the district office that same week, a collective act of defiance and hope. The response, when it finally arrived, was a swift, disheartening echo of the detectives' earlier obfuscation. They wrote back, citing the all-too-familiar refrain, everything was part of an ongoing investigation. Furthermore, they stated they couldn't release anything due to student privacy laws, a convenient shield to hide behind. It felt like a blatant cover-up, a transparent attempt to stonewall us, to hide something crucial, something damning. It was at that moment of renewed despair that Emily's mom, a quiet but insightful presence, mentioned she knew a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but a formidable woman named Orla Purcell, renowned for her work on civil rights cases. The very next day, we found ourselves in her downtown office, a space that exuded competence and gravitas. The walls were adorned with an impressive array of awards, plaques, and framed photographs, showing her alongside important, influential figures, each a silent testament to her formidable reputation and successful track record. She listened intently to our entire, fragmented story, without interrupting once, her gaze sharp, intelligent, absorbing every detail, every raw emotion. When we finished, she sat in thoughtful silence for a moment, then looked at us, her expression conveying a quiet resolve. She agreed to help us. Pro bono, a significant act of generosity and commitment, but with a critical stipulation. We had to get organized. She needed evidence, she explained, witness statements, every piece of documentation, all of it properly preserved and meticulously cataloged. Her instructions were remarkably specific, leaving no room for error. Screenshot any social media posts about the incident before they inevitably get deleted, she advised, recognizing the ephemeral nature of digital evidence. Write down everything you remember while it's still fresh, she urged, emphasizing the importance of immediate, unfiltered recall. Get contact information for every single witness you can identify. But then came a crucial, non-negotiable directive. Absolutely no contact with Miss Blackwood. No messages, no confrontations, nothing that could possibly be construed as harassment. The rules felt incredibly limiting, like invisible chains, yet the mere existence of a clear, actionable plan, guided by a professional, brought an immense, unexpected sense of relief. It made me feel less helpless, less adrift in a sea of grief and anger, less like I was drowning without a lifeline. That very night, fueled by a renewed sense of purpose, we immediately created a group chat to coordinate our burgeoning investigation. Emily, with her innate ability to connect with people, volunteered to spearhead the effort of collecting witness statements from our classmates. Billy, methodical and detail-oriented, took on the responsibility of tracking down and meticulously organizing all the physical and digital documents we would need. Malik, with his keen sense of narrative, committed to constructing a detailed timeline of every single event that had transpired. Everyone had a job, a concrete task to focus their energy on, transforming our collective, corrosive anger into productive action. It felt like we were finally doing something tangible, something meaningful, a palpable shift from passive despair to active resistance. It was as if we had drawn a line in the sand, collectively declaring that we absolutely would not allow them to simply sweep this away, to bury the truth beneath layers of bureaucracy and indifference. The very next morning, the sterile, impersonal crackle of Principal Penn's voice sliced through the customary hum of homeroom over the PA system, immediately silencing every pen, every murmur. Everyone in the classroom paused, rigid with anticipation, to listen. She cleared her throat twice, a nervous habit, before speaking, and I could tell from the carefully measured cadence of her tone that she was reading from something meticulously prepared. A pre-written statement designed to convey authority while revealing nothing spontaneous. Her voice, devoid of warmth, then delivered the chilling pronouncement. Any student participating in walkouts or protests during school hours would face automatic suspension and removal. The threat hung in the air. Cold and unforgiving, a clear warning shot fired across the bow of any budding student activism, designed to stifle dissent and maintain an illusion of order. Removal a vague but ominous term, hinting at potential expulsion or a more profound, devastating consequence. The authoritative voice, amplified by the school's antiquated PA system, had just declared a draconian measure, an immediate ban from all extracurricular activities, effective immediately. The words hung heavy in the air, a chilling pronouncement that felt less like a consequence and more like a deliberate act of suppression. A collective gasp seemed to be swallowed by the room's sudden, oppressive silence, thick enough to cut with a knife. My gaze darted across the rows of hushed students, catching fleeting, knowing glances worried, defiant, and furiously whispered conversations exchanged solely through narrowed eyes across the aisles. An icy dread snaked its way through me, settling deep in my gut, and my hands, clenching beneath the desk, began an involuntary, frantic tremor. I knew, with a certainty that turned my blood cold, precisely what this swift, punitive action signified for our carefully laid plans that now felt perilously exposed. 4 weeks. Whispers and late-night texts had woven together a shared vision. We weren't just content with quietly collecting evidence of the injustices. We were aiming for something far more substantial. A public declaration, a collective voice. And now, wasn't it brutally obvious? This wasn't about maintaining order. It was a transparent attempt to instill fear, to bludgeon us into submission and silence our burgeoning dissent. The principal's monotone continued to drone on for another seemingly endless minute. A litany of sterile phrases about maintaining optimal order and fostering a respectful learning environment, corporate jargon thinly veiled as concern. But his words dissolved into an irrelevant hum as my fingers, fueled by a surge of defiant adrenaline, were already flying across my phone's keyboard, sending urgent messages from beneath the sanctuary of my desk. The digital hive mind of our group chat, a clandestine network of shared purpose, exploded with activity. Within a mere 5 minutes, a flurry of over 40 messages flooded the screen, each one echoing an identical, resolute sentiment, a collective roar that vibrated through the digital ether. The message was clear, unwavering, and utterly defiant. We were doing it anyway. This latest attempt at intimidation had only served to solidify our resolve, hardening our collective will against their transparent machinations. The clock was ticking, counting down to third period, the designated moment for our planned action. And now nothing, absolutely nothing, was going to deter us. Not after the unspeakable injustice that had befallen David. His memory was not merely a motivation, but a burning imperative that propelled us forward. When the jarring, insistent shriek of the bell finally pierced the air, signaling the end of the period, I mechanically gathered my books, feigning a casual nonchalance as I began to drift towards my English class. Every fiber of my being screamed with a raw, electric tension, my heart hammering a furious, irregular rhythm against my ribs, threatening to burst through my chest, yet I strove to maintain an outward facade of utter normality, a mask to hide the tempest brewing within. As I navigated the surging tide of students in the hallway, my eyes immediately snagged on an unsettling sight. 3 imposing security guards, their unfamiliar faces grim and unyielding, stood sentinel by the main entrance. Their presence was stark, an alien invasion of our routine. They weren't just observing, their hawkish gazes swept over every passing student, their hands busily recording cryptic notes on official-looking clipboards. An unspoken threat hanging heavy in the air. And as if to underscore their tactical precision, 2 more figures, equally stoic and unblinking, were strategically positioned by the side exits, effectively sealing off all avenues of departure. It was a lockdown, without the official announcement, a silent declaration of war on our freedom to move. The message they were attempting to convey was crystal clear, etched in their rigid postures and watchful eyes. Don't even think about it. But instead of instilling fear, their heavy-handed display served only to ignite a fierce, unyielding anger within me, a fiery resolve that burned hotter with each passing moment. Second period, usually a blur of academic routine, stretched out interminably, an agonizing eternity. The hands of the clock on the wall seemed to crawl at a glacial pace, each tick an unbearable delay. My eyes darted to it every 2 minutes, perhaps even more frequently, willing the time forward, my patience fraying with every passing second. The teacher's voice, a distant murmur, attempted to dissect the nuanced symbolism within some classic novel, a futile exercise for my agitated mind. Her words, once captivating, now washed over me like an indistinct hum. My entire being was consumed by the electric anticipation of what was about to unfold, every nerve ending tingling with an almost unbearable tension. Then, like a signal from a distant, unseen conductor, the bell for third period finally chimed, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the oppressive quiet. I rose from my seat, mirroring the automatic movements of my classmates, but instead of joining the flow of students heading obediently to their next lesson, I pivoted decisively. My gaze locked on the main entrance, a point of no return. As if on cue, a familiar cluster had already begun to form. Emily, her jaw set with determination, stood prominently, flanked by Illy and Moloch, their faces reflecting a shared resolve. Around them, a solid nucleus of about 10 other kids had already gathered, their presence a silent testament to our collective purpose. From every conceivable direction, more figures materialized, emerging from the labyrinthine hallways like tributaries converging into a mighty river. Their numbers swelled with each passing second, a quiet, inexorable tide of defiance. The largest of the security guards, a formidable figure who looked as though he could single-handedly halt the stampede, took a deliberate step forward, planting himself squarely in front of the main doors, his broad frame an obvious barrier, but we didn't falter. Our pace remained steady, our collective momentum unwavering, an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object. One of the guards, his voice strained with a manufactured authority, began to recite a stern warning about unforeseen consequences and disciplinary actions. His words, however, were swiftly drowned out, rendered utterly impotent by the sheer, determined surge of 40 unified kids. It was a mathematical reality. 3 guards, no matter how imposing, were simply no match for the collective will and physical force of a determined student body pushing forward with a single, shared purpose. With a final, concerted push, we surged through the double doors, the metal frames groaning in protest, bursting out into the brilliant, unforgiving sunlight of the parking lot. There, a much larger assembly awaited us, a sprawling sea of student faces, their expressions a mixture of apprehension and unwavering solidarity, already congregating. A handful of teachers, their faces unreadable, stood sentinel in their classroom doorways, silent witnesses to the unfolding event. Their arms were crossed, their expressions a mixture of concern and a strange, almost resigned acceptance. Yet, tellingly, not a single one made a move to intervene or halt our progress. Was it fear of reprisal, or a silent, sympathetic understanding of our cause? In fact, as we streamed past, a few even offered barely perceptible, almost conspiratorial nods, tiny gestures of solidarity that spoke volumes more than any shouted word could. Our destination was the expansive front lawn, a verdant expanse usually reserved for school spirit rallies. There, we formed a tight, resolute cluster, a living monument. There were no booming chants, no hastily scrawled protest signs waved aloft. Instead, we stood together, shoulder to shoulder, in a profound, almost sacred silence, a collective, dignified vigil for David, our quiet presence speaking louder than any slogan ever could. The outside world, in its constant rush, acknowledged our presence. Cars driving by on the adjacent road began to respond, their horns blaring in a symphony of support, a spontaneous chorus of recognition. Passers-by, their curiosity piqued, raised their phones, capturing the poignant tableau with their cameras, a silent protest instantly going viral, testament to the power of shared imagery. After what felt like an eternity, though the clock confirmed mere 20 minutes had elapsed, our silent demonstration concluded. With the same quiet dignity with which we had exited, we turned and walked back inside, re-entering the building, then dispersing to our respective classes as if the dramatic interlude had never occurred. The air crackled with a strange, almost surreal tension, a palpable understanding that everything had changed, even as we pretended it hadn't. The school's response was as swift as it was predictable. By the time the final bell shrieked its release at the end of the day, a stark yellow detention slip had been precisely, almost menacingly, tucked into every single one of our lockers. The stark, bureaucratic details, specific dates and times were scrawled in an ominous, crimson-red pen, a visual testament to the administration's punitive hand. My own slip, grimly confirming the school's intent to make an example, decreed that I would be serving detention every single day after school for a grueling 2 weeks straight. It was a clear message. We see you. We heard you, and this is your consequence. But the school's official retribution, as harsh as it felt, was soon overshadowed by a far more insidious and personal attack. That very night, Wash, in a move of truly venomous malice, decided to pour gasoline on the already raging fire. He unearthed an old video, a seemingly innocuous clip from a family barbecue 3 years prior, and unleashed it onto social media, intending to weaponize my past. The video itself was a snapshot of a cherished, carefree moment. I was caught mid-laugh at some forgotten joke my uncle had cracked, a wide, genuine smile gracing my face as I tossed beanbags, engrossed in a game of cornhole in our sun-drenched backyard. I looked utterly, unambiguously normal, radiantly happy, a stark, cruel contrast to the shattered reality I now inhabited. His caption, a dagger plunged directly into the heart of my authenticity, declared with brazen, self-assured certainty. This clearly proves they'd always been perfectly fine. It's just a convenient act, playing up their condition for attention whenever it suits them. The sheer audacity, the callous dismissal of my lived experience, was breathtaking. The sting of this betrayal, exquisitely painful, burrowed deeper than any anonymous insult or official punishment ever could. It was an intimate violation, a shattering of trust, because Walsh wasn't just spreading lies. He was twisting the very fabric of our shared past, weaponizing cherished personal memories against me with a cold, calculated precision. He knew. He absolutely knew the truth that video captured a rare, precious good day, a fleeting window of respite in the relentless, unpredictable rhythm of my seizures. Yet, with a Machiavellian twist, he expertly manipulated it, presenting it to the world as irrefutable evidence that I was nothing more than a calculating faker, a dramatist seeking sympathy. And then there's the bewildering, almost maddening rhetoric from the authorities. I still find myself perpetually puzzled, my mind grappling with the detective's persistent, almost clinical insistence on using the word alleged in relation to David's death. Alleged, when a stark, undeniable death certificate, a brutal testament to the finality of his loss, presumably sits right there, starkly visible, on his very desk. What precisely, I have to wonder, still demands more investigation when a life has already been tragically, irrevocably extinguished, when a person is undeniably gone? The cold, legalistic language felt like a deliberate obfuscation, a way to distance themselves from the raw, painful truth. The cruel, stark juxtaposition of realities gnaws at me, a bitter pill to swallow. David's parents, still reeling from unimaginable grief, are now burdened with the crushing weight of a staggering $130,000 in medical bills, a testament to a life fought for and lost. Meanwhile, the school, seemingly unfazed, extends a leisurely paid leave to Miss Blackwood, the teacher implicated in the tragedy. Does anyone else feel the sickening lurch, the profound sense that there is something truly, horrifyingly twisted and fundamentally wrong with these priorities? It's a moral compass spinning wildly off true north. The venomous video, like a virulent digital plague, spread with alarming speed. Within a mere hour of its posting, it had amassed over 200 shares, multiplying its corrosive falsehoods across the internet. And the comments, they were a cesspool of unbridled cruelty, a digital feeding frenzy of judgment and vitriol, each word a sharpened dart aimed directly at me. Strangers, hiding behind the anonymity of screens, hurled accusations like stones. Liar. They screamed, attention seeker, David's death is entirely your fault for instigating this drama, for stirring up trouble where there was none. The narrative, expertly twisted by Walsh, was now being amplified by an angry, unthinking mob. The onslaught of digital malice became unbearable. With a choked cry of anguish and frustration, I hurled my phone across the room, watching in a detached haze as it spun through the air before colliding with sickening force against the drywall. The sharp, splintering crack of the screen against the unforgiving surface was a visceral echo of the fissures tearing through my own composure. The morning after Walsh's digital assault, retribution arrived, not from official channels, but from a fiercely loyal friend. Before the first bell had even thought about ringing, Darren, fueled by a righteous fury, intercepted Walsh by his locker. The incident, an explosive confrontation, traveled like wildfire. I heard no less than 3 separate, breathless accounts of what transpired before I even stepped foot inside the school building. Darren, his face a mask of incandescent rage, lunged forward, grabbing a fistful of Walsh's shirt. With a primal roar, he slammed Walsh backward, a sickeningly loud crash echoing through the pre-class hallway as Walsh's body met the unyielding cold steel of the lockers. The impact was so resounding, so undeniably violent, that it silenced the usual morning chatter, drawing every single eye in the vicinity. Walsh, visibly stunned and disoriented, managed a weak, stammering attempt at a protest, but it was cut short. Darren, his fury unspent, shoved him again with brutal force. This time, Walsh's head connected with a sharp, sickening thud against the rigid metal combination lock of the locker directly behind him. A sound that made my stomach churn even just hearing about it. The commotion finally drew the attention of 2 teachers who, with a burst of panicked urgency, came sprinting down the hallway, their voices raised in stern admonition. They managed to physically separate the 2 warring boys, but not before Darren, with a final, cathartic surge of righteous indignation, delivered one more powerful shove. Walsh's arm flailed, sending his meticulously organized textbooks scattering across the polished linoleum floor, their pages fluttering like distraught birds. Both boys, disheveled and fuming, were immediately marched off to the principal's office, their defiance a stark contrast to the usual subdued walk of shame. Predictably, by lunchtime, the administrative hammer had fallen. Both Darren and Walsh were handed identical 3-day suspensions, a cold, impartial judgment that felt anything but fair in Darren's case. The personal cost of Darren's fierce loyalty began immediately. His mother, undoubtedly exasperated and furious, was forced to abruptly leave her job to come and pick him up. A wave of profound nausea washed over me, a sickening knot in my stomach. To think that his raw, protective instinct, his brave defense of me, was now directly compromising his education, jeopardizing his future, the irony was unbearable. That night, a simple text message popped up on my still-cracked phone screen. It was worth it, Darren's unwavering conviction shining through even in terse characters. But I knew, with an agonizing certainty, that while he might feel justified, his parents, likely facing disciplinary actions or financial strain themselves, would be absolutely furious. Their anger a heavy price for his devotion. 3 days crawled by, each one a torment of internal debate. I had rejected the persistent requests no less than 5 separate times, each no a whisper of fear and exhaustion. But finally, a fragile resolve hardened within me, and I agreed to sit down for an interview with a student journalist from the school paper, realizing that my voice, however shaky, needed to be heard. We met in the hushed, almost sterile quiet of an empty classroom after school, the desks cleared, the air thick with unspoken tension. Before a single question was uttered, I meticulously laid out my boundaries, drawing clear and yielding lines in the sand about what topics were absolutely off limits, what sensitive areas I simply would not discuss. There would be no prying questions about my family, no intrusive probes into my medical history predating the incident, absolutely no speculative theories about blame or fault. Instead, our conversation would adhere strictly to the unvarnished facts, the stark, brutal reality of what truly transpired on that fateful day. Despite my carefully constructed resolve, my voice, a frail instrument, betrayed my internal turmoil. It trembled throughout the entire interview, a constant, fragile tremor that mirrored the shaking in my hands. Twice, I had to pause, forcing myself to take long, desperate gulps of water, my mouth having gone completely, agonizingly dry. A physical manifestation of the sheer emotional effort it took to speak. When she gently probed about the infamous strobe lights, the very catalyst of my trauma, I painstakingly recounted the terrifying, visceral sensation of my brain misfiring, of a chaotic electrical storm erupting within my skull, severing my connection to reality. Her next question concerned the locked door, that cruel, unforgiving barrier. My voice, though still shaky, gained a brittle edge as I vividly explained the horrifying, suffocating sensation of feeling utterly, completely trapped a helpless confinement that amplified the terror of the moment. And then, she uttered David's name. A single, simple question about him, and the words lodged themselves in my throat, choked by an overwhelming wave of grief and unspeakable sorrow. I simply couldn't speak, the silence stretching between us for what felt like an eternity, nearly a full minute, as I wrestled with the raw, gaping wound his loss had left. When the final question was asked, and the recorder clicked off, a profound sense of emptiness, coupled with an almost unbearable exhaustion, washed over me. I felt utterly drained, as if my very soul had been wrung dry. Yet, amidst the weariness, there was a faint, flickering ever of relief. I had spoken. I had finally uttered the unbearable truths out loud, entrusting them to someone who would meticulously commit them to paper, giving them a tangible, enduring form. True to her word, the article, a meticulously crafted narrative of our ordeal, went live that very night on the school paper's website. And just as quickly as it appeared, the digital battleground was set. Within an astonishing 2 hours, the comment section had absolutely exploded, a deluge of opinions, emotions, and accusations, proving that the digital arena spares no one. The reactions were, predictably, starkly divided. Roughly half of the commenters rallied passionately in our defense, their messages brimming with fervent support. They weren't just offering words of encouragement. Many bravely shared their own deeply personal, often harrowing stories of teachers and institutions dismissing or outright ignoring serious medical conditions, validating our experience with a painful, resonant echo. Conversely, the other half, a vocal and aggressive opposition, launched into a furious tirade. They branded us as hysterical attention seekers, accusing us of callously exploiting a genuine tragedy, twisting it into a manufactured drama simply to find a convenient scapegoat for what they dismissed as an unfortunate incident. One particularly vitriolic comment, dripping with passive-aggressive contempt, claimed that David's death was nothing more than unfortunate timing, a random act of fate. It then pivoted to accuse us, with chilling conviction, of cynically manipulating his memory, using it as a weapon to unjustly attack a perfectly good teacher, implying we were villains, not victims. Another, equally dismissive comment, scoffed that we were nothing but drama queens, self-absorbed individuals who were meticulously making everything about ourselves, rather than genuinely mourning David or seeking justice. The sheer audacity of these accusations, hurled by strangers who knew nothing of our pain, was infuriating. To sit there reading these digital diatribes, these strangers' faceless, nameless entities so casually, so confidently debating the very core of our suffering, our grief, and our desperate fight for accountability felt like a bizarre, perverse form of public torture, an endless trial by keyboard warriors, their judgments rendered without empathy or understanding. The crushing weight of whether David's death could have been prevented hit me like a physical blow, sending a wave of nausea through my gut so intense that I barely made it to the bathroom before violently emptying my stomach. 20 minutes later, still a crumpled heap on the cold tile floor, racked by uncontrollable sobs, my mother discovered me. Her footsteps, soft at first, grew urgent as she saw my helpless form. The following day, a glimmer of something unexpected pierced through the heavy fog of our grief. Orla, with a tone that hinted at both surprise and cautious optimism, called my mom. She explained that one of the paramedics, a silent observer from that chaotic, harrowing day, had found a way to reach out through her legal channels, specifically expressing a desire, a need to help. It felt like a lifeline extended from an unexpected quarter. However, his hands were tied by strict institutional policies. Speaking publicly or officially about the incident was a direct violation of his employer's rules, potentially jeopardizing his career. Yet, he made a crucial distinction. If formally compelled by a subpoena, a legal summons he couldn't ignore, he would then be free to provide a sworn statement, a detailed account of precisely what he had witnessed. Remarkably, he claimed to remember everything with startling clarity, not just the frantic attempts to revive me, noting the agonizing minutes that stretched into an eternity, but also the chaotic, unsettling state of the classroom itself when they first burst through the door. What exactly had he seen in that room? His testimony, we realized, could be the irrefutable evidence we needed, a stark illumination proving beyond doubt just how dire, how gravely serious the situation had truly been. Just 2 days later, the transcript from Mr. Peters' deposition arrived, a thick stack of papers that we hoped would offer answers. Instead, reading his words felt like a fresh stab, making an already unbearable situation exponentially worse, deepening the abyss of our despair. He chillingly claimed that when he peered through the small window in the classroom door that day, he had seen absolutely nothing concerning, no hint of alarm or distress. Could he have been so oblivious? His memory. A casual glance, a simple gesture, just Miss Blackwood, he recalled, giving him a placid thumbs up, based on that singular, seemingly innocuous signal. He assumed everything was fine, a fatal assumption, and simply continued on his way, walking past an unfolding tragedy. He further justified his inaction by stating the window shade was already drawn when he glanced, offering him no clear view into the room's interior. Therefore, he argued, he had no reason to think students were in distress. The sheer callousness of it was breathtaking. Reading those words, that he could have intervened, that he could have saved us, but instead, hadn't even noticed anything amiss, ripped away the last vestiges of my faith. It wasn't just him, it was a profound, heartbreaking loss of trust in every single adult, every authority figure who was ever supposed to be our protectors, our guardians. He was a mere 20 feet away, a stone's throw from a classroom where lives hung in the balance, where we were literally gasping for breath, perhaps even dying, and he just walked past. The image burned into my mind, so close, yet so utterly disconnected from our suffering. Later that very afternoon, a new, astonishing development emerged. Moloch, ever the digital sleuth, unearthed something truly incredible online, a hidden treasure trove of information. It turned out Miss Blackwood had maintained an old, forgotten blog from 5 years prior, a digital fossil she'd neglected to scrub from the internet. Moloch, relentless in his pursuit, had spent countless hours, eyes glued to the screen, sifting through the digital detritus until he finally stumbled upon it. The content was chillingly revealing, post after post, a venomous cascade of rants. Her vitriol was aimed squarely at neurodivergent kids, whom she disparagingly claimed were being coddled, creating a victim culture that was supposedly eroding the fabric of our schools. Could her prejudice have truly run so deep? One particularly horrifying entry asserted that seizure disorders were fundamentally overdiagnosed, cynically suggesting that most kids just wanted attention and special treatment. The hypocrisy, given David's situation, was unbearable. Another post echoed this sentiment, arguing that parents actively enabled fake medical conditions as a convenient excuse for their children's poor behavior. Her words painted a picture of a deeply cynical, utterly unsympathetic individual. We immediately sprang into action, feverishly screenshotting every single page, every damning word, before she could possibly realize her oversight and erase the digital trail. These crucial pieces of evidence were then meticulously added to our burgeoning folder, a physical representation of our growing case, which seemed to swell and thicken with each passing day. Orla, ever strategic, wasted no time. The very next morning, she dispatched formal preservation letters, official legal demands to both the school district and, notably, the smartboard manufacturer. These letters imperatively demanded that they maintain, without alteration or deletion, all electronic logs and data originating from that specific classroom. It was a clear move to safeguard any digital breadcrumbs. The precise, unyielding language of those legal documents, so starkly different from our hurried, helpful messages in the group chat, instantly infused everything with an undeniable gravity. This wasn't just talk anymore. This was real, serious, legal action taking shape. But the legal battle wasn't just external. The very next morning, a chilling new development unfolded. A stark white letter emblazoned with the formidable logo of the teachers' union at its apex mysteriously appeared in every student's mailbox. It was authored by Paxton, a name that now carried a heavy weight and comprised 3 full pages of meticulously drafted legal threats. The core message was terrifyingly clear, a dire warning detailing the precise repercussions if any student dared to post Miss Blackwood's name online, effectively silencing our nascent efforts to expose the truth. As I scanned its intimidating contents in the bustling hallway, certain words leapt off the page like predatory beasts, defamation, libel, and civil lawsuits. They weren't just words. They were blunt instruments designed to instill fear and stifle dissent. Anxious copies of the letter were being furtively passed around, whispers replacing the usual hallway chatter. Already, I saw classmates hunched over their phones, frantically deleting social media posts from the previous night, their faces etched with a dawning fear. My gaze fell upon 2 freshmen, their young faces streaked with tears, actually sobbing as they absorbed the implications of personal liability and the dreaded concept of permanent records. Was this truly the cost of seeking justice? Then, in a sudden, defiant act that momentarily silenced the hallway, Emily snatched my copy of the menacing letter and, with a fierce resolve, ripped it clean in half. right there in front of everyone. It was a physical manifestation of the anger bubbling beneath the surface. Her act ignited a spark, and the anger, raw and potent, spread through the hallway like wildfire. More and more kids began to grasp the infuriating reality. They weren't just being warned. They were being explicitly threatened, coerced into silence, simply for daring to tell the truth. My mom, bless her heart, had to pull me out of school early that day for a quick grocery run. Despite the emotional whirlwind, I genuinely believed I'd be fine, that the change of scenery would offer a momentary reprieve. But then, the self-checkout machine, an innocuous modern convenience, suddenly started flashing an angry, insistent red when a stubborn barcode refused to scan. In an instant, my entire body went rigid, a primal fear seizing control. The relentless, strobing pattern of the flashing light hit my brain like a concussive hammer blow, shattering my composure. Abruptly, terrifyingly, I couldn't even recall where I was, the familiar supermarket morphing into an alien, disorienting space. My legs, betraying me, instantly turned to jelly, and I desperately clutched the cold counter, digging my fingers in to prevent an ignominious collapse. My mom, with an almost supernatural instinct, dropped her basket, abandoning our groceries. Her arms, a sudden, comforting fortress, enveloped me, guiding my trembling form urgently toward the exit, her focus entirely on me. The stares of strangers felt like burning pinpricks as she practically carried me, a dead weight, through the vast expanse of the parking lot. All the while, my mind was a frantic, empty scramble, desperately trying to relearn, to simply remember, how to put one foot in front of the other. Even when we finally reached the relative sanctuary of the car, my hands were still uncontrollably shaking, a stark physical testament to the trauma. It was then, with a heavy heart, that the terrifying realization dawned. These triggers weren't fading. They were deepening, growing more pervasive, more potent. I was getting worse, not better. Every single flashing light, every unexpected flicker, now registered as an immediate, palpable threat. My brain, once capable of parsing safety from danger, seemed irrevocably broken, utterly unable to distinguish between genuine peril and the benign, everyday occurrences of normal life. The very next day, Darren, ever vigilant, began a new routine. He'd materialize at my locker between every single class, his presence a constant, watchful shadow. He would then escort me to each classroom, his hand a steady, reassuring, yet almost stifling presence on my back, as if bracing for the possibility that I might, at any given second, simply collapse, a fragile porcelain doll. During lunch, his vigilance bordered on the obsessive. He checked on me no fewer than 3 times, his gaze scrutinizing my plate, ensuring I was consuming enough, as if my very existence depended on his supervision. After school, his dedication remained unwavering. He would steadfastly follow me all the way to my car, even though his own vehicle was parked inconveniently on the opposite side of the sprawling lot, a testament to his protective instinct. By Wednesday, the constant, suffocating attention became unbearable. I finally reached my breaking point, a plea escaping my lips. I needed space. I needed room to simply breathe, to reclaim a modicum of autonomy in a life that felt increasingly out of control. His face fell, his eyes widening in a mixture of shock and hurt, as if I had physically slapped him. "I was just trying to protect you," he mumbled, his voice laced with winded confusion, a stark reminder of his well-intentioned but overwhelming efforts. There, amidst the rows of parked cars in the harsh afternoon light of the parking lot, we stood, yelling at each other a raw, public outburst that marked the very first time we'd exchanged such angry words since the inception of our relationship. It was a painful rupture. He, consumed by the lingering shadow of David's loss, kept repeating, almost frantically, that he couldn't lose me too, and I, desperate to assert my own resilience, kept defiantly insisting that I wasn't made of glass, that I wasn't as fragile as he perceived, nor as easily shattered. It was a battle neither of us could win, a painful stalemate. The fight ended not with resolution, but with a heavy, bruised silence that stretched between us for 2 agonizing days. That Thursday, another seismic shock hit the school. An anonymous source leaked an internal email chain from the administration. A confidential communication that then spread through the student body like virulent poison, infecting every conversation. The subject line itself was a stark indicator of their priorities, managing the paid leave situation. And within the emails, not a single message strayed from the callous administrative jargon. Every single exchange was cold, calculated, discussing optics, liability, and media response. It was a masterclass in corporate distancing. In the entire chain, not one solitary email bothered to mention David's name. Not one expressed a shred of human empathy. Not one inquired about the emotional well-being of the rest of us. The traumatized students, David's death, our collective trauma, was reduced to a mere incident, a clinical, detached euphemism. They discussed damage control with the casual indifference of corporate executives, treating our profound grief and the loss of a classmate as nothing more than a PR problem. A messy public relations crisis to be meticulously managed and swept under the rug. The sheer, sickening corporate language used to describe a dead kid, the brutal dehumanization of it all, ignited the familiar, terrible nausea. Once again, I found myself bolting for the bathroom, violently emptying my stomach, the world spinning in disgust. My hands, trembling uncontrollably, fumbled with my phone as I forwarded the damning email chain to Orla. Her immediate response, sharp and incisive, was that this was exactly what we needed for the case. Cold comfort, knowing our pain, was now a weapon. The school board meeting that very night was a pressure cooker of emotions, packed to the gills with an expectant crowd of parents and an eager contingent of reporters, their cameras flashing. Their pens poised, each of us was allotted a mere 2 minutes to speak, a blink and you miss it window to convey our pain and our truth. My turn was set, third in line, following Emily and then Billy, the weight of their impending speeches heavy in the air. When David's name finally passed my lips, my voice, betraying my composure, cracked, a painful fissure in my carefully constructed facade. Yet, despite the emotional tremor, I clung to my notes, my eyes fixed on the words, determinedly reading aloud the unvarnished truth of what really happened that day. Even as I spoke, a wave of dismissive whispers reached my ears from the rows behind me, a cacophony of parents muttering about mass hysteria and attention-seeking teenagers. One man, a father presumably, actually laughed a short, derisive bark when I bravely recounted the terrifying details of my own seizure. The sheer inhumanity of it stunned me into momentary silence, a profound insult to my suffering. Every fiber of my being screamed to pivot, to unleash a torrent of fury upon their unfeeling faces. But I held fast, my gaze unwavering on my notes, my voice, though still trembling, pushing through the words until the merciless clock finally signaled the end of my allotted time. As soon as the public comment period opened, Ren, a beacon of resolute purpose, quickly rose to his feet. In his hands, he held a thick, formidable folder, bursting with papers clearly. He had come prepared. He then boldly proposed a critical, long overdue measure, mandatory, comprehensive training for all substitute teachers, specifically focusing on. The terse discussion about medical conditions and emergency protocols had finally concluded. The board members, a panel of seemingly detached authorities, offered only polite nods and made sparse notes, before declaring, almost dismissively, that they would implement the proposed changes sometime within the next academic year. I stood there, a silent scream building in my throat, a visceral protest against their bureaucratic indifference. David, my David, had desperately needed help 6 weeks ago, when he was still breathing, still fighting for his life, not next September, when the world would have long moved on. This glacial timeline, a testament to their profound disconnect from our suffering, felt less like a resolution and more like a cruel, calculated slap in the face to every single person who had endured that stifling room, bearing witness to a system utterly failing its most vulnerable. It was a searing insult, compounding our grief with a fresh wave of disbelief and impotent rage. However, the fight was far from over. The following week, Orla, a beacon of pragmatic strength, meticulously guided us through the arduous process of filing a federal complaint with the Office for Civil Rights. The woman on the other end of the phone, while undeniably kind in her voice, delivered a devastating blow. The investigation, she explained with a disarming professionalism, could stretch for as long as 18 months to reach completion. She peppered her explanation with reassuring, yet utterly hollow, words like thorough and comprehensive, while my gaze remained fixed on the calendar, each passing day an agonizing reminder of David, already in the ground. What solace could such a meticulous inquiry offer to a ghost? Justice delayed, in that moment, felt indistinguishable from justice denied, especially when the very person who needed it most was already beyond its reach, his vibrant life extinguished. Every single form we painstakingly filled out, every identical box we ticked, felt like a futile exercise in futility, a bureaucratic ritual performed for naught. Yet Orla insisted, with an unwavering conviction, that this paper trail was absolutely essential, a silent weapon we might one day wield. Back at school, the social landscape had shifted drastically, becoming a cruel, isolating desert. Kids, once friendly faces, now conspicuously crossed to the other side of the hallway the moment they saw me approaching. Malicious rumors, like a virulent contagion, spread through the corridors. I craved attention, they whispered, and had gotten exactly what I wanted, even if David had paid the ultimate price for it. One morning, the words "Drama Queen" appeared, scrawled in permanent marker, a stark, ugly declaration on the cold metal of my locker. The whispers, like a swarm of stinging insects, followed me everywhere, accusing me of destroying Miss Blackwood's career for absolutely nothing. The physical symptoms of stress, the tight knot in my stomach, the persistent dull ache behind my eyes were certainly painful, but the pervasive, crushing weight of social isolation, that insidious, invisible wound, hurt infinitely worse. Then, Sunday night Emily, a lifeline in the gathering storm, materialized at my doorstep. Her eyes were swollen and bloodshot, her face streaked with cares and snot, a raw testament to her own turmoil. Her parents, she choked out, had issued a chilling ultimatum, choose her future, her college prospects, over my vendetta. They had warned her, with brutal honesty, that associating with me was jeopardizing everything she had worked for. Despite their threats, she threw her arms around me, hugging me so fiercely I gasped for air, promising, with unwavering loyalty, that she wasn't abandoning me, no matter what they said or did. We collapsed onto my bed, a silent testament to our shared grief and fear, crying together until the late hour demanded she return home. The following Monday, after school, Mr. Peter, looking unusually drawn and agitated, pulled me aside. "Can we talk privately?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. We found a secluded spot, and his hands, I noticed, were visibly trembling as he admitted, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond me, that he should have looked closer, paid more attention through that classroom window. He confessed to being haunted, tormented by what he hadn't done, the inaction that now robbed him of sleep. The guilt in his eyes, a deep, sorrowful pool, seemed undeniably real, a palpable weight pressing down on him. Yet, his remorse, however genuine and profound, possessed no magic to bring David back. He asked, his voice cracking, what he could possibly do to help. My answer was immediate, devoid of pretense. Testify, I told him, at the hearing. If we ever get one. The raw, physical outburst of Darren slamming Walsh into lockers certainly seemed like a pretty direct message, a primal roar of frustration echoing through the school halls. But I found myself wondering, did Walsh, in his detached, almost clinical approach, truly grasp the depth of the public's anger? Or did he simply believe he was merely reporting facts, an impartial observer oblivious to the firestorm he'd ignited? Was he capable of understanding the human cost of his choices? 3 days later, the mail carrier, a familiar figure in our suburban landscape, handed me a surprisingly thick, official-looking envelope from the Office for Civil Rights. My hands, suddenly cold and clammy, trembled uncontrollably as I tore it open in the quiet sanctity of our kitchen. The letter, weighty and formal, bore an official government seal prominently at the top, a symbol of its gravitas. It began with the sterile, legalistic address, your complainant, before boldly listing our case number, 2024-1847, in stark, black letters. My mom, a comforting presence, leaned over my shoulder, reading silently as I scanned the dense, formal language, confirming the official receipt of our complaint and the commencement of their investigation into the school district. It was, at its heart, just paperwork, a collection of bureaucratic sentences. But seeing the case number, that tangible identifier, made everything suddenly feel more real, more official, and infinitesimally, terrifyingly, more hopeful. The very next morning, as I absently spun the combination lock on my locker, a small, dark object unexpectedly tumbled out, landing with a soft thud against my shoe. It was a small, black USB drive, completely devoid of any label or distinguishing mark. I picked it up, a flicker of curiosity mixed with confusion had someone dropped it by accident. Later, during lunch, seeking a modicum of privacy, I cautiously plugged the unlabeled drive into my laptop in the library. Instantly, a single video file materialized on the screen. My eyes darted to the timestamp. It was from that day, in music class. A cold dread, a sickening lurch, twisted in my stomach as I clicked play. The footage, undoubtedly from a hallway security camera, was grainy, almost pixelated, but it offered an unobstructed, albeit brief, view straight through our classroom door window for approximately 30 agonizing seconds. The scene captured was a maelstrom of panic. Kids were diving wildly under desks, seeking cover, and someone, unmistakably, was seizing violently on the floor. And there, starkly visible amidst the chaos, stood Miss Blackwood, frozen, doing absolutely nothing. The camera angle might not have been perfect, but it was more than enough to clearly discern the escalating bedlam and her chilling, complete lack of response to what was undeniably a dire medical emergency. Without a second thought, I immediately texted Emily, who, with characteristic speed, sprinted over from the cafeteria. We watched the horrific footage together, 3 times, each viewing a fresh jab of pain and confirmation, before we finally called Orla. She answered on the second ring, her voice immediately sharp with urgency as we breathlessly explained what we had found. Her instructions were swift and unequivocal. Do not share it with anyone. Do not even make copies, not until she could painstakingly verify its origin, its chain of custody, the integrity of evidence, she explained with practiced calm, was absolutely critical. We simply couldn't risk it being thrown out of court on some technicality. The realization settled in. Someone inside the school, a silent ally, was trying to help us. But who possessed such privileged access to that damning footage? And why, of all people, had they chosen to deliver it to me anonymously in such a clandestine manner? The mystery only deepened. That same afternoon, Mom, her face a mask of quiet determination, drove me to the Pritchard house. David's mother, a fragile figure of grief, awaited us in the living room, surrounded by an overflowing landscape of tissue boxes and photo albums, scattered like broken memories across the coffee table. With a gentle but firm resolve, she led me upstairs to David's room. It was a poignant, heartbreaking tableau, looking precisely as he had left it that fateful morning before school. His bed, half made, seemed to beckon, while his chemistry textbook lay open on his desk, forever paused at an unfinished lesson. A neat stack of college applications, symbols of a vibrant future, sat beside his computer. Northwestern's application was on top, its essay section meticulously completed, yet tragically, heartbreakingly, never submitted. We sat together on his bed, and she held my hand, her grip surprisingly strong, as she explained her own resolute decision. She had hired her own lawyer, she confided, to pursue a civil suit. Not just against the district, but against Miss Blackwood personally. She then asked if I would be willing to testify about what I had witnessed, what had transpired. My nod was immediate, unequivocal. David, in every fiber of my being, deserved justice, a tangible accounting for his life, even if he wasn't here to bear witness to it himself. She then showed me his journal, its pages filled with his elegant handwriting, where he had penned his deepest aspiration, to become a doctor. To dedicate his life to helping children grappling with neurological conditions mirroring his own epilepsy, a secret nobody, not even I, had known about. The profound irony, the crushing weight of that revelation, hung heavy in the air. The next day, after school, Darren asked to speak with me privately. We found ourselves in his car in the parking lot, a temporary sanctuary, as he stared intently at the steering wheel, unable to meet my gaze. His voice was low, strained, as he revealed the immense pressure he was under, his basketball scholarship to the state university, his golden ticket out of our suffocating town. was now gravely threatened because of his involvement in the incident. His coach, he confessed, had issued a stern, unequivocal warning: stay quiet, stay out of it. His hands, I noticed, gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white, a raw manifestation of his internal struggle. He promised, his voice cracking, that he still loved me deeply, but he simply couldn't risk his entire future, everything he had worked for, by becoming publicly entangled in the ongoing fight against Miss Blackwood. Intellectually, I understood the crushing weight of his predicament. College, after all, was his only viable escape route from the limitations of our small town, the only pathway to a different life. But emotionally, in the raw, aching core of my being, it still felt like a profound betrayal, like he was choosing his future, his dreams, over David's memory, over our shared quest for truth, and over me, overdoing what was fundamentally right. He pulled his car to a quiet stop at the curb of my house, the engines low, familiar hum now sounding like a mournful echo against the deafening silence that had settled between us. After a prolonged, unspoken moment thick with tension and regret, he simply dropped me off. I stood there on the porch, a solitary, almost numb figure under the gathering twilight, and watched his car, once a comforting sight, recede into the deepening distance. It shrank from a distinct form to a mere speck of light, then utterly vanished, swallowed by the winding street. A cold, hard certainty solidified in the pit of my stomach. Our easy, uncomplicated relationship, once a steadfast anchor in my life, would undeniably, irrevocably, never be the same after this jarring, almost brutal, incident. 2 days later, days that felt like an interminable stretch of silent contemplation and underlying anxiety, my mom, her face etched with a quiet, persistent concern, drove me downtown. The city's usual vibrant hum and ceaseless traffic flowed around us, a stark, almost disorienting contrast to the heavy, claustrophobic quiet that enveloped the interior of our car. We navigated through familiar streets, each turn bringing us closer to what felt like an entirely new and daunting destination. We finally arrived at a nondescript, small office building, its bland brick facade blending seamlessly with the urban landscape. Yet to me, it stood out like a beacon, starkly marking the beginning of a new, uncertain, and incredibly unwelcome path. This was it, my very first therapy appointment. Inside, the therapist, a woman with kind yet piercingly serious eyes, greeted us with a soft, understanding smile before handing me a weighty clipboard burdened with a stack of crisp, intimidating forms. I began to diligently, almost robotically, fill them out, each question probing deeper into the minute nuances of my seizure triggers, the sudden, disorienting flash of bright lights, the jarring impact of unexpected loud noises, the insidious creep of acute emotional stress. It was a stark, almost clinical, reminder of this unwelcome new chapter that had so violently inserted itself into the fabric of my life. She then leaned forward, her voice calm and measured, explaining in reassuring tones that our work together would focus on developing practical coping strategies. We'd learn how to actively manage the overwhelming light sensitivity and the debilitating stress that now, undeniably, held the power to trigger these terrifying episodes. For homework, she gave me a neatly printed worksheet, its grids and columns a constant, visual reminder, instructing me to meticulously track my triggers throughout the coming week. This assignment, more than any other single moment, solidified the stark, undeniable truth. This convoluted, fear-laden existence was, from this point forward, my new normal life, a reality I was now being forced, however reluctantly, to accept. She patiently taught me various breathing exercises, guiding me through slow, deliberate inhalations and exhalations that promised to calm the erratic rhythm of my heart. And then she showed me a pair of rather futuristic-looking special glasses. These weren't ordinary spectacles. They were specifically designed to filter out certain light frequencies, those insidious wavelengths that might just help prevent future seizures, offering a fragile glimmer of hope in an otherwise murky landscape. That very weekend, trying to recapture a sense of normalcy, I was idly checking my social media feeds, scrolling through the mundane updates of friends, when my phone abruptly vibrated with an incoming call. It was Emily, and her voice, when it burst through the speaker, was a frantic, piercing scream. Someone created a fake account. She shrieked, her words laced with a furious disbelief. They're using your name and your exact profile picture. My blood ran cold. The insidious nature of the violation hit me instantly. The account, a chilling digital doppelganger, had brazenly posted screenshots of my confidential medical records, openly displaying my epilepsy diagnosis and my entire medication list. These highly personal details were accompanied by a barrage of truly nasty, humiliating comments, cruelly accusing me of being an attention-seeking fraud. The sheer audacity, the malicious intent, was staggering. By the time Emily and I, operating in a frantic, almost desperate scramble, managed to report the egregious content and get the fake account taken down, it was already too late. Like wildfire through dry tinder, those damning screenshots had already circulated widely, permeating countless group chats and being enthusiastically reposted by a multitude of anonymous, faceless accounts. The damage was done, the humiliation, a gaping wound. Someone, clearly with malicious intent and illegal access, had violated strict HIPAA laws to acquire those highly personal records, meticulously orchestrating this cruel campaign to publicly humiliate me online. The frustrating, almost maddening, part was that despite our best efforts, we simply couldn't trace the digital fingerprints of the individual or individuals behind this venomous attack. Who would do such a thing, and why? It was Orla, ever the voice of calm reason and strategic thinking, who suggested an audacious, yet brilliant, countermove. Take control of your own narrative, she advised. Her words like a lifeline, record a video statement about what really happened that day. The idea was empowering, a chance to reclaim my voice from the cacophony of online whispers and lies. I set up my phone on my bedroom dresser, transforming my private sanctuary into an impromptu studio. And for the next 3 grueling hours, I attempted to articulate the unvarnished facts. It was an arduous, emotionally draining process, a constant battle to push past the welling tears and maintain a facade of calm, to keep my voice steady and devoid of the raw emotion threatening to overwhelm me. The final version, meticulously edited to remove any wavering, was an 8-minute video. In it, I calmly and clearly explained the precise timeline of events, detailing Miss Blackwood's specific and utterly reckless actions that day, actions that had, without a shadow of a doubt, endangered not just me, but multiple other students. Posting it felt terrifying, like stepping off a cliff edge into the unknown, exposing myself to further scrutiny and potential backlash. Yet, paradoxically, it also imbued me with a profound sense of control over how my story was finally being told, snatching the reins away from the malicious voices and preventing others from twisting it into their own distorted versions. Within a mere 2 days, the ripple effect began. Seamus Rader, a prominent local news reporter known for his investigative prowess, contacted Orla urgently requesting an interview about the escalating incident. He subsequently ran a compelling segment on the evening news, prominently featuring my raw, honest video statement, and, furthermore, interviewing other parents whose children had been trapped in that same classroom that harrowing day the dam had broken. Tips, like an unstoppable torrent, began flooding into the news station, revealing a disturbing pattern of Miss Blackwood's troubling behavior at her previous 2 schools. Among these alarming revelations was a particularly horrifying incident where she had allegedly locked a diabetic student in a closet during a severe blood sugar crisis. A detail that sent shivers down my spine, confirming the depth of her negligence. The police finally spurred into decisive action by the mounting public pressure and damning evidence. Scheduled formal interviews with all 23 students who had been present in that classroom. Orla, a pillar of strength, sat steadfastly next to me, fulfilling her vital role as my attorney, her silent presence a profound source of comfort as I painstakingly recounted my statement. They, the detectives with their grave expressions, asked incredibly detailed questions, meticulously probing every minute of that day, leaving no stone unturned. A stenographer, her fingers flying across the keyboard with astonishing speed, typed down every single word I uttered, while 2 other detectives diligently filled pages with their precise notes. It was an exhaustive, mentally draining process, forcing me to relive every terrifying second with agonizing clarity. Miss Blackwood's lawyer had, apparently, advised her against speaking to investigators, a strategy Orla, with a knowing, almost cynical glance, remarked was basically an admission that she knew she'd done something profoundly wrong, a tacit acknowledgement of guilt. 2 days later, the IT guy from the school district, a quiet individual whose name I couldn't recall, called Orla's office. I happened to be there, sifting through yet more dense paperwork, a constant reminder of the legal battles ahead. Orla, sensing the critical nature of the call, immediately put him on speakerphone so that we could both clearly hear what vital information he had managed to unearth. His voice, tinged with a professional gravity, confirmed our deepest suspicions. He had pulled up the smartboard logs, the digital footprint from that exact classroom, on that precise day. And there it was, laid bare for all to hear, undeniable and damning. A YouTube video, chillingly titled Extreme Strobe Light Challenge 10 Hours, had played continuously from 11:42 a.m. to 11:54 a.m., precisely the 12-minute window during which everything had so horrifically transpired. The meticulous log further detailed Miss Blackwood's own login credentials being used to initiate the video, and, with a horrifying precision, she had deliberately set it to full screen mode at maximum brightness. Witnessing the cold, irrefutable digital proof, a definitive confirmation of her calculated malice, made my chest feel impossibly tight, a physical manifestation of the anguish. Yet, even this undeniable evidence, this vindication, didn't bring David back to life, nor could it magically fix the deep, scarring trauma inflicted upon any of us who endured that terrifying experience. The very next morning, a thick, official-looking certified letter arrived at my house, bearing the formidable insignia of the school district's lawyers. Inside, it contained a formal offer, $50,000 if I agreed to sign their settlement agreement. This wasn't merely a financial transaction. It explicitly included a non-disclosure agreement, a clause designed to legally gag me, preventing me from ever speaking publicly about what had happened again, effectively silencing my voice. My mom, her brow furrowed with growing indignation, meticulously read through the dense, 20-page document at our kitchen table while I, in a surreal juxtaposition, ate my breakfast cereal. The mundane crunch of flakes contrasting sharply with the gravity of the unfolding situation. She kept shaking her head, a silent, furious protest, at different sections, especially the particularly egregious clause that stipulated I couldn't post anything on social media, give any interviews to the press, or participate in any future legal action against the district or Miss Blackwood personally. The money, she acknowledged, would certainly cover the vast majority of my escalating medical bills, the steep cost of the ambulance ride, the emergency room visit, plus the expense of the new daily medication I now had to take because my seizures, a cruel aftermath, had significantly worsened after that dreadful day. But signing it, she stressed, meant staying quiet about David dying, allowing his memory to be eclipsed by silence, and, perhaps most galling, Miss Blackwood would remain on paid administrative leave, seemingly untouched by the consequences of her actions, as if nothing had ever happened. 3 days later, a text message from Malik buzzed on my phone, a collective summons for everyone to meet at his garage after school. The word had apparently spread like wildfire. We had all received the exact same settlement offer. When I arrived, the air was thick with nervous energy. A dozen other kids were already there, their own official-looking letters spread out like a morbid hand of cards across his dad's grease-stained workbench. Each a stark symbol of our shared trauma and the district's calculated response. Billy, fueled by a simmering anger, paced back and forth restlessly, his voice sharp and insistent. We should all refuse, he declared, his frustration palpable. Because taking the money means they win. It means they get away with it. In stark contrast, Sarah, her eyes red-rimmed and distant, kept repeating, almost to herself, that her family desperately needed the money. It was for her ongoing therapy bills, she explained, her voice trembling, because she couldn't sleep anymore without the terrifying, indelible image of David's face, slowly turning blue, haunting her every waking and sleeping moment. The arguments, initially hushed and tense, quickly grew louder, more impassioned, when someone's older brother, a student in law school who clearly understood the legal nuances, arrived. He clarified, with a chilling precision, that if we were to accept these settlements, we would forfeit our right to be witnesses in each other's individual cases, and, crucially, we wouldn't be able to assist David's grieving parents with their rightful wrongful death lawsuit. This stark legal reality ignited a fresh wave of shouting, everyone passionately debating whether we collectively owed it to David, owed it to his memory, to his family to refuse the money, to stand united for justice. Emily, her face a mask of fierce determination, gently but firmly grabbed my arm, pulling me away from the escalating cacophony of voices and leading me outside into the comparative quiet of the darkening street. I honestly think, she confided, her voice low and urgent, that anyone who takes that money is basically saying David's life was only worth $50,000. Her words hung heavy in the air. A moral accusation. But then, almost as if on cue, Walsh, always the pragmatist, appeared, his voice cutting through the tension. He launched into an impassioned argument that we'd be stupid not to seize the guaranteed money, pointing out that a trial could drag on for years, an agonizing, protracted battle. And there was always the very real risk that we might lose anyway, ending up with nothing. The logic was cold, but compelling. Just as the internal turmoil threatened to overwhelm me, my phone buzzed with an incoming text message. It was from Darren, a short, almost casual note that simply advised, you should just take the money and use it to move to a different school district. You could start fresh there, without everyone knowing you as the seizure girl. The suggestion, though meant kindly, felt like a punch to the gut, a painful reminder of how I was now perceived. I showed the text to Emily, whose face instantly contorted in anger. That's exactly what the district wants, she exclaimed, her voice tight with indignation. They want us to disappear, to vanish quietly, to let them sweep everything, every single bit of it, under the rug as if it never happened. The sheer, overwhelming stress of being pulled so violently between these conflicting arguments, these starkly opposing perspectives, made my hand tremble uncontrollably. A visible manifestation of my internal chaos, and I had to sit down, feeling my legs buckle beneath me under the immense weight of it all. Collapsed down on the unforgiving curb, the rough concrete biting into my skin, because that familiar, terrifying aura of an impending seizure had begun to creep over me once more. The initial tremor, the dizzying distortion of my vision, it was a siren wail within my own body. This sudden, alarming physical manifestation of my trauma was potent enough to cut through the raucous arguing that had enveloped us moments before, silencing the cacophony with a stark, unsettling abruptness. For those fleeting minutes, a tense quiet descended, heavy with unspoken fear, as Mallet, his usual boisterous demeanor replaced by a look of genuine concern, knelt beside me, pressing a cold bottle of water into my trembling hand and murmuring reassurances, making absolutely certain I was okay, or at least, as okay as I could be. The very next day, a stark contrast to the previous evening's raw emotion, Principal Penn, with her impeccably coiffed hair and practiced smile, materialized at the door of my English class. She pulled me out with a saccharine sweetness that grated on my nerves, ushering me directly into the polished, somewhat sterile confines of her office. There, she had meticulously staged what could only be described as a corporate-style presentation. A projector hung softly, casting a beam onto a pulled-down screen, displaying the title, Restorative Justice, a path to healing and community togetherness. Her spiel, delivered with an almost rehearsed earnestness, centered on a proposed healing circle. The premise was simple, yet deeply offensive. Miss Blackwood would offer some form of apology to us, the students, and then we, in turn, would share our feelings, collectively agreeing to move forward together as a community. As she spoke, gesturing expansively, she clicked through a series of PowerPoint slides. Each one featured generic, painfully optimistic stock photos, smiling, diverse groups of people, their faces radiating a manufactured serenity, hugging in soft focus, holding hands in perfect circles, their eyes gazing earnestly into one another's. It was a visual lexicon of superficial reconciliation. Wouldn't this be so much better? She posited, her voice laced with a persuasive, almost pleading tone. Then all this divisive legal fighting that is simply tearing our school community apart. The hypocrisy was palpable. Principal Penn's perfectly curated healing circle PowerPoint, with its saccharine images of forced togetherness, felt sickeningly opportunistic. The timing of this grand gesture seemed not just convenient, but cynically calculated, arriving precisely as everyone at families. The district was weighing the intricacies of potential legal settlements. A chilling suspicion began to coalesce in my mind. Who had informed her about our discreet garage meeting the day before? And why was it me she had singled out, pulling me out of class for this solo, patronizing presentation? Was I being sized up, tested, perhaps even pressured? I met her gaze, unflinching, and unequivocally stated that I had absolutely no intention of sitting in any circle, real or metaphorical, and certainly no desire to pretend to forgive someone whose reckless actions had directly led to the death of my classmate. The word killed hung in the air, a stark, uncomfortable truth. Her practiced smile immediately tightened, morphing into a thin, almost imperceptible line. She chastised me, her voice dropping to a cool, admonishing tone, informing me that killed was a very strong word to use. Perhaps, she suggested, I should seriously consider how my inflammatory language might be adversely affecting other students' delicate ability to process their trauma. The sheer audacity of her attempt to weaponize psychological jargon against my legitimate anger was infuriating. She persisted, relentlessly pushing the narrative that Miss Blackwood, too, was suffering and, therefore, deserved a chance to make amends. It was then, a simmering rage threatening to erupt, that I knew I couldn't stay a second longer without unleashing a torrent of words that would undoubtedly earn me an immediate suspension. Without uttering another syllable, I simply stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the polished floor, and walked out of her office, leaving her mid-sentence, the PowerPoint slides still glowing with their false promise of peace. That very afternoon, the suffocating isolation I had felt began to dissipate. Orla called, her voice a bomb, to tell me that David's mom's lawyer had reached out, proposing we coordinate our individual cases. It became horrifyingly clear that the school district, in a cynical display of power, was actively trying to divide and conquer us. They were shrewdly offering differing settlement amounts to various families, meticulously calibrating these offers based on their calculated assessment of how much fight each family had left in them. The lawyer's name was Annie Pritchard, a name that now shimmered with a new kind of hope. Pritchard's astute strategy was to unite all the grieving families, to forge an unyielding front so that the district couldn't pick us off one by one with their manipulative, paltry settlement offers, essentially trying to buy our silence and our grief. Hearing that David's mom, in her profound sorrow, was also choosing to fight, to refuse to simply take the money and be silenced, was a source of profound relief. It made me feel infinitely less alone in my own stubborn refusal to concede, in my conviction that justice, not just compensation, was what truly mattered. Over the ensuing 2 weeks, a rigorous and often excruciating ritual began. Orla had me report to her office every single day after school, not for comfort, but for relentless, grueling practice sessions for my upcoming deposition. Her method was simple, yet brutally effective. She made me recount the story, the vivid, painful details of that horrific day, over and over and over again, until the narrative felt both ingrained and agonizingly fresh. During these sessions, Orla would embody the role of Miss Blackwood's lawyer, adopting a chillingly hostile demeanor. Her questions, specifically designed to paint me as either an untrustworthy liar or a manipulative attention seeker. She'd fire off queries like, have you ever exaggerated your symptoms before this incident? Or do you perhaps enjoy the attention you receive from having seizures? These questions were like barbed hooks, tearing at my composure, deliberately provoking me. It was a Herculean effort to stay calm, to not let the searing anger show on my face. Orla meticulously drilled me to pause for a measured moment before every answer, allowing me to collect my thoughts and temper my emotions, to answer only the precise question asked, never volunteering a single extra detail that could be twisted against me. And, most challenging of all, to maintain an almost preternatural calm, even when the questions felt like personal attacks on my integrity and my pain. We even meticulously planned for the terrifying contingency of me having a seizure during the deposition itself. Orla, ever thorough, made sure the court reporter was explicitly briefed to meticulously document everything that transpired, every sound, every movement, and had all my medical alert information readily accessible, just in case opposing counsel, in a truly abhorrent mood, dared to suggest I was feigning an attack. The morning of Miss Blackwood's own deposition, I wasn't allowed to be present in the room, a frustrating exclusion from a critical moment in my own story. But Orla recounted every chilling detail to me afterward. She painted a vivid picture of Miss Blackwood, seated there in a crisp, dark navy suit, a veneer of professional respectability belying the callousness of her testimony. She had, Orla explained, steadfastly insisted that we, the students, were all performing, categorically asserting that teenage girls especially were prone to mass hysteria and attention-seeking behavior. It was a dismissive, almost misogynistic pronouncement that painted us as emotionally volatile and inherently untrustworthy. As if to bolster her preposterous claims, she actually brought up a bizarre, anecdotal proof. Her sister's daughter, who, Miss Blackwood claimed, had supposedly faked seizures for 2 years before her parents, in a supposed act of enlightened intervention, stopped enabling her, and, miraculously, the girl was cured. This grotesque distortion of a family matter was presented as irrefutable evidence that Miss Blackwood knew we were all faking our symptoms. And that's precisely why she felt utterly confident using the strobe light as exposure therapy. The sheer audacity of twisting a horrifying assault into a misguided medical intervention was breathtaking. When the lawyers pressed her about David, about his death, her response was delivered with a chilling, clinical detachment. She declared that David was probably just caught up in the group hysteria and that his death was merely an unfortunate coincidence, emphatically not related to her actions. The casual dismissal of David's life, the complete lack of remorse, the refusal to take any responsibility, sent a fresh wave of incandescent fury coursing through me. My hands began to shake uncontrollably, a tremor of pure, unadulterated rage that felt like it would tear me apart. I knew I couldn't remain in Orla's office, my anger a volatile, dangerous presence. I had to leave, to physically escape, walking around the block 3 times, each time a desperate attempt to burn off the fury, before I could finally force myself to calm down. The following week, the spotlight shifted to Mr. Peter's deposition. This time, Orla, perhaps sensing my deep need to witness some form of accountability, allowed me to watch through the thick, soundproof glass door. I saw him, a man usually so composed, visibly crumble. His shoulders slumped, his face contorted with a raw, uncontrolled grief, and then he broke down, tears streaming freely, when asked about looking through our classroom window on that fateful day. He confessed, his voice thick with anguish, that he had indeed seen Miss Blackwood give him a casual thumbs-up gesture, a seemingly reassuring sign. And based on her apparent calmness, he had simply assumed everything was fine. But the devastating admission that followed was a gut punch. He hadn't truly looked at us students. Hadn't noticed the palpable, escalating chaos unfolding directly behind her. Now, he revealed, the guilt was a relentless tormentor, stealing his sleep, his mind trapped in an endless loop of what if he had just opened that door? What if he had paid closer attention? He kept repeating, I'm sorry, over and over, his tears seemingly genuine, born of profound regret. But the stark reality, a cold, hard truth, pierced through the hollow sound of his apology. Sorry didn't resurrect David. Sorry certainly didn't mend my brain, which now, in the aftermath of that day, suffered seizures with twice the frequency it had before. And in that moment, observing his brokenness, I was struck by a chilling realization. Miss Blackwood had never, not even once, uttered that simple, crucial word, sorry. Later that same week, the final deposition was that of Paxton, the district's superintendent, a man who exuded an air of corporate slickness. He spent a laborious 3 hours explaining, with an almost dizzying array of bureaucratic jargon. 3 long, agonizing weeks later, Walsh, his face drawn and etched with a nervous tension, sat in the lawyer's office for his deposition. I watched him through the glass door, his gaze perpetually fixed downwards on his own hands, a telltale sign of deep discomfort, or perhaps shame. When the lawyer directed a question about that terrifying day in music class, I braced myself for his account of the chaos, his fear. But what emerged was something far more insidious, a betrayal that cut deeper than any physical injury. He didn't speak of the strobe light, or the panic. Instead, he began to speak of our grandmother, dredging up a painful family history. He recounted, in excruciating detail, how she had been telling him, ever since we were just children, that I was faking everything for attention. His voice, though hesitant, carried the weight of years of invalidation, of a narrative of deception crafted within our own family. It was a cruel, unexpected twist, an attack from within, that left me stunned, the implications of his testimony twisting in my gut. She had promised to call him every single week, her voice dripping with a calculated concern, to relentlessly warn him about what she painted as my manipulative tactics, and how I had supposedly, quite cunningly, fooled every single doctor we'd ever seen. She'd bombard him with articles, stark and unsettling, about Munchausen syndrome, then weave elaborate, convincing stories about past instances where I had allegedly feigned illness, all to conveniently sidestep family gatherings and responsibilities. The lawyer, a picture of quiet diligence, meticulously jotted down every word as Walsh, visibly distraught, recounted how my grandmother had systematically poisoned his mind, convincing him that any attempt to help me would merely enable my ingrained behavior. He confessed, his voice heavy with regret, that she had been subtly turning him against me for years, a slow, insidious erosion of trust. Yet he vehemently insisted that this long-term psychological conditioning in no way excused the terrible inaction he had allowed to happen. Back at school the very next morning, the air itself felt heavy, charged with an unspoken tension, everything subtly, irrevocably altered. In the bustling hallway, a few kids approached me, their eyes lowered, murmuring apologies for not having done more, for standing by silently that fateful day. Malik, bless his heart, even presented me with a card, its edges slightly crumpled, signed by nearly half the basketball team, a small but significant gesture of solidarity. Yet equally palpable was the disdain. Other kids, unable to conceal their judgment, conspicuously rolled their eyes the moment they spotted me approaching. Whispers, sharp and cutting, followed me like shadows, claiming we were being overly dramatic, insisting David would have succumbed anyway, given his pre-existing condition. As if that absolved anyone of responsibility, one particularly brazen girl didn't mince words, flatly stating we were just trying to extract money from the impending lawsuit. The cafeteria, once a communal hub, now starkly cleaved into 2 distinct factions, those proudly displaying purple ribbons for David, a somber tribute, and those who, with an almost defiant air, clearly believed we were simply overreacting. This simmering division spilled out into the parking lot, where heated arguments erupted, escalating into physical altercations between students passionately debating whether Miss Blackwood truly deserved the grim consequences unfolding around her. 2 long, agonizing months crawled by before we finally received the coveted court date. The judge, with a somber gravity, absorbed every shred of testimony, poring over the voluminous medical records and meticulously reviewing the chilling video clip Billy's phone had managed to capture. a crucial piece of evidence retrieved just moments before Miss Blackwood had confiscated it. She ultimately granted the preliminary injunction, a significant albeit initial victory, mandating that every single staff member undergo comprehensive seizure response training within a mere 30 days. Yet, to our profound disappointment, she denied our plea to have Miss Blackwood summarily fired, citing the imperative of due process and reminding us that even Miss Blackwood, regardless of her actions, was entitled to her rights. Our lawyer, Eva the Pragmatist, tried to explain that this was, in fact, good news, a strategic step forward, he called it. But how could it possibly feel like good news when the stark reality was that she was still drawing her full salary, her life seemingly untouched by the tragedy she had caused? Another month dragged on, marked by a pervasive sense of injustice, before the district finally extended an offer to settle. Their proposal included the creation of a substantial memorial fund in David's name valued at $200,000, dedicated specifically to epilepsy research, a tangible legacy from an unimaginable loss. They also pledged a complete overhaul of their substitute teacher training program, promising to implement rigorous new standards, and to mandate medical emergency certification for all staff members, a systemic change long overdue. Miss Blackwood, under the weight of mounting pressure, agreed to resign, though her teaching license would face a comprehensive review by the state board, a lingering consequence, not an immediate ban. The district's lawyer, with a practiced professional detachment, repeatedly hailed it as a fair resolution, but David's parents, their faces etched with an unassuageable grief, could only sit there, silent tears streaming down their faces, a stark testament to the immeasurable cost. My own neurologist appointment that week, a necessary follow-up amidst the emotional maelstrom, was far from reassuring. The tests confirmed my deepest fears. My seizure threshold, once stable, had plummeted significantly, a direct, undeniable consequence of the relentless, overwhelming stress I had endured. The doctor's instructions were stark and uncompromising. I would need to increase my medication dosage and become hypervigilant about avoiding any triggers, a list that now included flashing lights, chronic lack of sleep, and, perhaps most dauntingly, any significant emotional stress. It was then, with that sobering diagnosis, that I knew, with a heartbreaking certainty, that I had to end things with Darren. We sat in the quiet intimacy of his car after school, the engine off, the air thick with unspoken words. I gently, haltingly, explained that I simply couldn't shoulder the demands of a relationship on top of the immense weight of everything else I was carrying. He kept repeating, almost robotically, that he understood, but his eyes, red-rimmed and brimming with edged tears, refused to meet mine. We had built 2 years of shared memories, of quiet comfort and tender affection, but my brain, already pushed to its limits, simply couldn't absorb any more pressure, any more emotional strain. The following week, Emily, a steadfast beacon of support, helped me channel my pain into purpose. Together, we launched a disability advocacy group right there at school. To our surprise and profound encouragement, 20 kids showed up for that inaugural meeting in the library, their faces a mixture of apprehension and hope. We brainstormed practical, impactful ideas, creating peer buddy systems for students navigating various medical conditions, pushing for the implementation of far more robust emergency protocols. One girl, her voice trembling slightly, bravely shared her story of a teacher who had cruelly refused to let her check her blood sugar during a test, a terrifying act of negligence. A boy with Tourette's talked about the humiliation of receiving detention for his involuntary tics, a stark reminder of the profound lack of understanding. We meticulously crafted plans to present our proposals directly to the school board and immediately began circulating a petition for mandatory disability awareness training for all staff, a fundamental, overdue step towards a more inclusive and empathetic environment. Having something concrete, something productive to focus my simmering energy on, truly helped to temper the relentless anger that had been steadily building inside me, threatening to consume me whole. One serene Saturday morning, Dee and I found ourselves at David's grave, the cemetery hushed and empty, save for the gentle rustling of leaves. We didn't exchange a single word about the lawsuit or Miss Blackwood, or any of the harrowing events that had brought us there. We simply sat, side by side, on the cool grass beside his headstone, silently watching the majestic clouds drift lazily across the vast expanse of the sky. His parents had chosen a beautiful, poignant quote for his marker, a testament to enduring spirit. Light never truly goes out, it merely changes form, me, with a quiet solemnity. Methodically pulled blades of grass from the earth, one by one, while my fingers, tracing the deep, cold carving of his name in the polished granite, felt the stark reality of his absence. After an hour had passed in comfortable, mournful silence, we walked back to her car, still without a word, because, quite simply, there was nothing left to say. Some wounds, some profound losses, cannot ever truly be fixed, not by comforting words, not by monetary compensation, not even by the cold, often slow, scales of justice. The very next week, fueled by a renewed sense of purpose, I dedicated every single evening to writing an article for the local paper, meticulously detailing exactly what had transpired. My approach was deliberate. I chose not to personally attack anyone, nor did I resort to inflammatory language. Instead, I calmly, factually laid out the systemic failures, the deeply ingrained, structural deficiencies that had tragically culminated in David's death. I wrote, with a clear and steady hand, about the glaring absence of proper substitute teacher training, the shocking lack of medical emergency protocols, and, perhaps most painfully, the pervasive, dismissive culture within the school that so often categorized genuine student medical needs as mere attention-seeking. I concluded the piece not with accusations, but with concrete, actionable proposals for change, mandatory, comprehensive medical training for all staff, crystal clear reporting procedures for emergencies, and robust accountability measures to ensure such a tragedy could never happen again. My voice, surprisingly, remained steady and unwavering as I read the finished article aloud to my parents before sending it off. It wasn't because I was magically healed, or that the pain had vanished. Rather, it was because I had, in some profound way, learned how to carry the immense damage, how to bear its weight without allowing it to completely consume the very essence of who I was. Thank you for allowing me to navigate this incredibly arduous journey with you, for bearing witness to my story. It has truly been a profound experience, a shared path, until we meet again. And hey, don't forget to like the video.